Standing in front of a beautiful house, the young man excitedly said that he had finally found out where these people lived. At the same time, he couldn't help but be amazed by how enormous the house was, along with its vast surrounding grounds. After knocking on the gate, the young man muttered to himself how strange it was that only two people lived in such a massive mansion. At that very moment, the door swung open, and the lady of the house shouted irritably that he should stop banging like that, or he'd scare all the neighbors away. She then asked why he had taken so long, and added that she had actually been about to go to sleep. Looking at the beauty and surprise, our hero couldn't help but think that this girl had been prepared specifically for him, though it was hard to believe. The girl watched the stranger curiously, noticing that he seemed lost in his own thoughts, as if deciding where to begin. Smiling awkwardly, the young man extended his hand, wanting to introduce himself and appear as polite as possible. But instead, the lady turned away and said she already knew a plumber had arrived, the one they had been waiting for since morning, so he should stop talking and get to work. Still standing there with his hand extended, the young man was horrified, realizing he had been mistaken for a plumber. As for the lady, she thought that if it weren't for that Chinese man, she probably would have never gotten around to fixing the broken bathroom. She recalled how 3 days ago something unbelievable had happened, when her father shocked her with something very strange. The man explained that 20 years ago, when he was young and easily fooled, he had traveled to China for work and accidentally ran into a dangerous gang. The visitor from the capital thought it was the end for him, but then someone appeared and quickly dealt with all of them. As payment for the help, they agreed to marry their children in the future. Continuing his story, he happily declared that the marriage between the two would symbolize his friendship with that man. The girl believed her father had completely lost his mind. She shouted that he could have promised anything else, but not this, because it was pure madness. Closing his eyes, the man calmly replied that it was a tradition passed down from his ancestors, and he had made the promise he believed was right. The beauty refused to calm down, arguing that it was a forced marriage and she didn't care about traditions. They lived in the modern world. As he was leaving, the man added that he had to go, and that his daughter should welcome Yuan-jun and keep him company so he wouldn't be bored. The lady of the house remembered that she had wanted to say something else, but by then her father had already left. Thinking back on it, she muttered that if that so-called fiancé ever showed up, he wouldn't get off easy. Seeing how strangely the girl was behaving, the young man slightly covered his face, thinking she was the kind of person capable of anything. Despite that, he wanted to know what had happened to her. After all, he hadn't even said anything yet. Meanwhile, the lady asked irritably why the plumber was just standing there. Did he think the faucet would fix itself? Yuan-jun carefully observed the figure of his new acquaintance, smiling slyly. But a moment later, he realized something was off with her, so it would be better not to provoke her, and he said he would get to work right away. The girl didn't like this young man. She thought to herself that he was no different from the others who looked at her the same way. After a while, our hero was already in the bathroom, examining the broken faucet, from which water kept running non-stop. Watching the situation in horror, the young man had no idea how to fix it. He had never dealt with anything like this before. Seeing that the plumber wasn't doing anything, the beauty asked why he was standing there like he was frozen. He wasn't being paid to just stand around. Inwardly, Yuan-jun cursed, noting that this wasn't why he had come to this house at all. On top of that, he didn't like the disrespectful tone she was using. Realizing he already had a wrench in his hands, the young man decided to try tightening the faucet, especially since the leak had almost stopped. He figured it wasn't anything serious, just a loose nut, which he successfully tightened. Approaching the bathroom, the girl asked in a businesslike tone if the plumber had already finished. Turning around, the young man asked her to step aside because she was getting in his way. Instead, the beauty handed him another tool, explaining that she just wanted to help. Still studying his new acquaintance, our hero realized she had already formed a very poor opinion of him. Despite that, the real problem at the moment was fixing the faucet completely, and that turned out to be much harder than expected. Suddenly, something went wrong, and water burst out with full force in the direction where they were standing. The young man understood he had made a mistake, but more than anything, he feared the reaction of the homeowner. Seeing that the girl was completely soaked, Yuan-jun immediately started apologizing, saying it had happened by accident. He looked at her carefully, waiting to see how she would react. For a moment, the beauty just stood there, staring at the incompetent plumber who had clearly messed up. At that very moment, the young man suddenly felt the urge to compliment her, but as he began to speak, he was met with a stream of curses. The lady of the house didn't like that the plumber was saying completely inappropriate things, and she had no intention of tolerating it. In the next instant, she raised her leg and shouted for him to get out of her house immediately, since he was causing more harm than good. Grabbing her leg, the young man calmly replied that she could end up with serious problems if something happened to it. But the girl didn't care what he was saying. She just wanted him out of her house as soon as possible. The young man barely had time to realize that she had already lowered her leg and was now coming at him, ready to strike with her hand. As she grabbed his arm, Yu Wenjun asked her to be careful. In the struggle, they both slipped on the wet floor and fell into the bathtub. At last, silence filled the room. Lying in the tub, they stared at each other, caught in an awkward and compromising position. Suddenly, the young man instinctively leaned in and kissed the beauty who was so close to him. But instead of understanding, a loud scream echoed through the house, loud enough to be heard outside. The girl immediately began insulting the plumber, realizing he was mocking her. Her anger knew no bounds. She just needed to throw him out somehow, but didn't know how. Trying to defend himself, Yu Wenjun explained that he had only wanted to help. There had been no bad intentions. The girl kept shouting that he didn't belong there and should leave immediately and never come back. But in the next moment, she realized that during the fall, she had injured her leg, and it was now hurting badly. Sitting down on the floor, the lady of the house tried to figure out what to do next to ease the pain. But before she could do anything, she noticed the plumber walking quickly toward her. Without saying a word, the young man simply picked her up in his arms to carry her to the living room. However, instead of gratitude, he received a slap across the face, along with accusations of indecency and inappropriate behavior. Seeing her reaction, Yu Wenjun tried to calm her down, explaining once again that he was only trying to help. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. The girl heard him call her by name and was shocked, since she had never introduced herself. In a cold tone, the young man declared that he was her future husband, the one she had been waiting for all this time. After hearing this, Suzuka shouted even louder, saying it was complete nonsense, not even worth discussing. Despite everything that had happened, the young man still wanted to help, so he asked her not to move, warning that it would only make the pain worse. The lady decided to listen, since she really couldn't put weight on her leg. After finishing, Yu Wenjun explained that it should feel a little better now. Crossing her arms, Suzuka firmly told him to get all those thoughts out of his head. The young man looked at her carefully, realizing her words had genuinely upset him. He said out loud that if the family had refused, they should have said so earlier instead of wasting his time. After a short pause, he explained that it was actually their families who had come up with the arrangement long ago, and his side had simply agreed. Then jokingly, he added that he might reconsider if Suzuka asked nicely. Hearing that, the beauty snapped again, saying he must have lost his mind during the fall. But the young man boldly replied that nothing was wrong with him. The lady was about to say something else, but a phone call interrupted her. A moment later, she saw a message asking if they were going to the bar that night. Suzuka was pleased. She felt like the day might actually turn out well. She immediately turned to the young man, who, upon hearing his name, said she could speak calmly without insults. But she ignored his words and instead asked if he was going to start acting like a fiancé now. With irritation in his voice, the young man said he had heard that in Japan, women didn't get a say, but she replied that his information was outdated. Pretending not to care, Yu Wenjun asked what she actually wanted from him. With a sly tone, the beauty asked him to go somewhere with her and keep her company. Closing his eyes, the young man said it was too much trouble and suggested discussing it the next day. Suzuka didn't like that answer at all and clenched her teeth in anger. Then she hit him again and shouted that she had already told him they were going out. Realizing that arguing with her was pointless, the young man finally agreed. The girls who were also heading to the establishment noted that it was a truly amazing place. Looking at the beauties, our hero thoughtfully noted that Japan really does have some very cool establishments. Realizing that the man was looking not at the bar, but at the strangers, Suzuka thought again that this boy only had one thing on his mind. However, the beauty did not continue her thought because she heard someone call out to her. The young man shouted that the beauty had come today with a friend, and since that was the case, he would open a wonderful wine for them. Throwing herself into the blonde's arms, Suzuka demonstratively screamed that she really missed her boyfriend, and she added in a whisper that her friend was obliged to play along with her, although he had already understood everything himself, and therefore was not going to hesitate. Taking the young man by the hand, the girl said that she wanted to introduce him to a certain young man. Pointing to our hero, Suzuka declared that he was her uncouth Chinese immigrant friend. And then she added that this charming guy is her lover, his name is Fuji, and besides everything else, he is also the owner of this establishment. Our hero thought to himself that it was all clear anyway, since the blonde guy would hardly have come here just like that. At the same time, Yu Wenjun understood that this man did not look very happy. And while the girl was asking Fuji to behave properly, the new acquaintance explained that he had no business being in this place, and therefore he was already leaving. Looking at the young man, the beauty shouted, "Where is he going so quickly and without permission?" But the guy happily declared that he was going to go to a bar to relax, and what's more, he wanted Suzuka to pay for him. The girl didn't like this state of affairs, but at that moment she didn't want to argue at all. The same applied to our hero. who actually wanted to have a little drink and sit in silence. Yoo In-jun thought to himself that he absolutely did not understand why it was necessary to arrange this whole circus. At that very moment, the guy heard a female voice not only greet him, but also say something else. The young man turned around. He knew that he had no acquaintances in this city, and as for ordinary beauties, they never paid attention to him. Turning around, the young man noticed a pretty brunette who was embarrassed but continued to look at the visitor. The surprised young man asked the beauty if she had made a mistake or confused him with someone else. Still shy, the bar guest said her name was Haruka, and she wouldn't mind if the young man treated her to a drink. Turning away, Yoo In-jun couldn't believe that such a beauty had noticed him, something that had never happened before. The guy realized that at that moment he looked very stupid, and so he apologized to his new acquaintance. Haruka didn't answer. She was waiting for the young man to answer so she could understand what to do next. Realizing that he needed to be polite, the guy pulled out his chair and asked the brunette not to be shy and to sit next to him. After a few minutes, mutual understanding had established between the boys, and they were happily drinking their drinks. Knowing that something needed to be said, our hero asked his companion why she had come to this establishment. The young man added that such a beauty was in the bar, therefore she probably didn't come here for a drink, and if that was the case, he would like to know the real reason. For a moment, the girl was silent and thoughtful. It seemed that she did not know what was best to say. With a certain sadness in her voice, Haruka asked her new acquaintance for one favor, although she was in no hurry to say what exactly she wanted. Rising from her seat, the visitor was about to explain something, although the guy was not so much listening to the words as assessing the figure of his new acquaintance. After which Haruka quickly stated that she wanted our hero to stroke her gently. The embarrassed young man thought that he had accidentally misheard all this, and so he asked the brunette again about what she had just told him. Now the bar visitor herself began to feel embarrassed. It was clear that her strength had diminished considerably, and therefore she needed to gather her courage again. The girl, embarrassed, tried to explain that this was not what she had intended to say, and that she did not know how to explain it all so that it would be understood. The young man thought to himself that he had not even touched this girl, yet he felt very awkward. Yoo In-jun finally decided that this was all for a reason, and so he said that the beauty was somehow poorly prepared, did not know what to say and when it was appropriate. And so the young man became interested in who forced Haruka to do what she actually came here for. The brunette still felt awkward and tried to get out of it by saying that the guy had simply misunderstood her. But now our hero understood that all this was not happening of her own free will, and he honestly answered that the beauty was behaving too unnaturally, which immediately revealed a lack of experience and practice. Haruka didn't know what else she could say in this situation and simply watched the guest. Suddenly, the brunette stood up and bowed. She said that she was sorry that everything turned out this way. It was just an accident. Yoo In-jun didn't want things to end like this, so he asked the brunette not to rush to leave. However, the guy turned out to be too slow. When he stood up, his new acquaintance was already almost at the door, which surprised the young man because the beauty was wearing heels. But this wasn't the only thing that surprised the visitor. He suddenly heard a strange sound, and so he raised his head to make sure that there was a surveillance camera in front of him, which was filming everything. At that moment, the guy realized that this was not the most ordinary meeting. Moreover, all his suspicions turned out to be correct. Our hero rose from his seat and looked more closely at the camera, although he did not understand how this would help him. The young man had no intention of standing on ceremony with anyone, even though he knew someone was looking at him very closely, but instead he simply showed one of his fingers. Suzuka watched everything that was happening from the monitor, although she was still confused. The disgruntled beauty slammed her fist on the table with all her might and was angry that she had come across such a familiar person. Fuji knew he wanted to help somehow, so he said they could send a few thugs to calm the young man's ardor a little. The beauty was afraid that everything could get out of control, but the blonde assured her that nothing terrible would happen. They would just hint something to this boy. Turning to his subordinate, the young man asked him to immediately call Taishima to him, and he immediately added that this roof had cost him a pretty penny, and it was time for this man to fulfill his role. Despite the unpleasant incident, Yoo In-jun continued to sit at the bar, and it seemed that he was in no hurry to leave, because there was no need to hurry. Instead, the guest turned to the bartender and asked him to bring him another glass of the drink. The employee noted that the gentleman was very resistant to alcohol, and immediately heard that they usually had much better drinks at home, and therefore this could simply be used for warming up. At that very moment, a gang of young people entered the bar and addressed someone as if he were a cutlet, ordering him to immediately go outside to resolve important issues. Our hero turned around. He wanted to see who had come to this establishment, since it was considered quite elite. At that very moment, the ill-wisher loudly shouted that he wanted to know which of Yoo In-jun's visitors he wished to see. Without waiting for an answer, the boys approached our hero and boldly asked if he was the one they had been looking for so long. The young man scratched his ear and, with his characteristic restraint, asked what he was needed for by strangers with whom he saw no point in communicating. The blonde grabbed the guy by the collar of his shirt and immediately declared that he was acting too brazenly. But that was unnecessary, since the boss had ordered him to be brought in immediately. He probably had a very important conversation. Realizing that the jokes were over, Yuanjun calmly asked if the villain really thought he could accomplish what he had planned. He didn't understand why the boy was acting so calm and unperturbed, because it was a serious matter. As for our hero, he again explained in an indifferent tone that he had no intention of going anywhere at all, and moreover, he was very happy in this place. And then he added that there must have been some kind of mistake, and therefore he recommended that the guys go where they were going. The blonde, not understanding why they were talking to him in such a disrespectful tone, immediately began shouting at the young man. And a moment later, he ordered his guys to immediately come to his aid to deal with the boy. At this time, Taishima, who was a local boss among street gangs, did not understand where his protege had disappeared to. However, after a moment, his eyes widened as he saw something unusual. Aidu was walking down the alley, although he was doing it too slowly, and with him was some unknown man. Having noticed his subordinate, the man immediately asked where he had been, since they had been entrusted with a very important but easy task. The beaten guy tried to say something, but it was clear that each word was difficult for him. Tashima tried to understand how it happened that someone beat up the young man, since a whole group had gone on a mission. So the boss asked in an icy tone what had happened, how it had happened that Aidu had barely made it. Glancing sideways at our hero, the local bandit explained that he was about to complete the task, but this boy had interfered with him. The leader wanted to know who this man was, because he had never seen him before and did not know his name, but he wanted to. The guy, looking closely into the eyes of his ill-wisher, explained that his name was Yuanjun. Hearing this name, Taishima was delighted, although the young man did not understand whether this man really knew him. In an icy tone, the villain stated that they did not know each other personally, but there was one person who asked him to teach the boy a lesson, to make sure that he learned good manners. Hearing that Taishima had changed his mind, the boy asked a counter question about whether the gang leader had really become a good guy. But there was no answer. Instead, all the guys standing behind their boss rushed towards the boy, shouting as they went that they would quickly teach him how to talk to his elders properly and not to hit him. Yuanjun saw that a whole crowd was approaching him. Despite this, he did not even think of moving from his place, as if he had some kind of clear plan. At the moment when one of the opponents struck, the guy very quickly dodged to the side, which shocked the attacker. Moreover, our hero triumphantly shouted that the villain was moving too slowly, and therefore he would pay for it. While the young man was fighting with one, another was already approaching with a stick from behind. The young man was confident that he would be able to deliver a powerful blow. He was partly right, but he just didn't think that the speed of the boy standing in front of him was so lightning fast that he managed not only to react, but also to hit back at his attacker. Yuanjun wasn't going to give up so easily. He knew that these guys would definitely not spare him, and therefore he himself didn't want to be a fool by leaving them unharmed. The young man decided that now was the time to deal with the leader standing nearby. The man was prepared for anything, but not for the fact that an ordinary boy could easily defeat all of his guards. Watching everything from the side, Tashima tried to understand who this guy was, where he came from, and who he studied with, if even 20 rivals were not his opponents. Again and again, the man said out loud that this was something impossible. No force would be enough to cope with the crowd. But our hero didn't care what they thought of him. He had actually easily dealt with all his ill-wishers and was now thinking about what to do next. Watching the young man with horror, the boss also thought about where he should run or where he should go so as not to see this boy. He smiled and told Taishima that it was now his turn. However, the man, despite the fact that he was scared, was not going to give up. He knew how to do something himself and therefore wanted to try his hand. The moment the boss moved forward, our hero easily intercepted him. After that, he turned it in such a way that he could strike with one movement of his foot. The villain's eyes widened, and at that moment he realized that this boy was unusual, that he possessed some kind of superpower. Another second passed, and this boss was already lying on the ground, unable to even move. Looking at all the opponents, Yuanjun noted that it was much easier than he initially thought. However, the battle was not over. Slowly getting up, Taishima said with sarcasm in his voice, "Is this really all that this arrogant boy is capable of?" Taking out a knife, the man shouted that now he would show him what a real fight was, so that he wouldn't pretend to be a hero. At that very moment, the boss pounced on the guy, confident that he would manage to wound him and only then decide what to do next. However, the attempt was unsuccessful, as the young man managed to dodge just as quickly as before. The man paused to consider what he should do next, wanting to deceive the boy standing opposite him. Realizing that Taishima wanted to strike again, our hero quickly reacted and stepped aside again. Yuan Jun asked why the villain was smiling like that. Did he really think he could do something that would surprise our hero? However, the man remained silent. He didn't like the guy asking such strange things. Suddenly, the young man fearlessly grabbed the knife by the tip, knowing exactly what he planned to do next. Seeing how easily the boy knocked out the sharp knife, the villain wanted to stop him, but it was too late to do anything. And so, a moment later, he started shouting about what kind of fingers one needs to have to do such things. In an icy tone, our hero informed his adversary that a person must be prepared to die if he is going to take someone's life, and therefore he could test his readiness right now. And again, the man noticed that the young man's boot was somehow flying up very quickly, although he didn't know what this meant. In this situation, words were superfluous, since the foot, or rather the kick, spoke louder than any words. And again, the man thought to himself that this couldn't be happening. He had calculated everything and should have stabbed the boy as he had planned, but the situation had turned against him. But the battle was not over yet. Our hero wanted his ill-wisher to remember their meeting forever, and he forcefully threw him back. Already in flight, the villain tried to say something, although he knew that it would not play any role anyway. As he left, Yuan Jun declared that he had met weaklings who were incapable of anything, yet still tried to pick fights and prove something. Tashima told the boy not to think that he was safe, because after this, Sasaki's group would never leave him alone. As before, the guy smiled, answering that he was not afraid of anyone. Moreover, if this group found out that some boy was able to easily defeat healthy guys, then they would change their minds about doing anything. At this time, Suzuka and her friend were sitting at home and chatting pleasantly about something, realizing that no one was bothering them. Suddenly, the girl asked who this Taishima was, and also whether he knew the limits of intimidation, since he might miscalculate his strength and then it would all end badly. But the blonde man calmed his friend down, explaining that he had warned his boss to be careful and that at most they would break a few of the boy's bones. Fuji wanted to add something, but at that moment he noticed that someone had snatched the glass from his hand. Smiling, our hero thanked them in a soft tone for not beating him too hard, and moreover for sparing him. Jumping up from his seat, the blonde tried to understand where the young man had come from and how it happened that he looked so good. The young man hesitantly asked how it happened that the guy came here. Raising his glass, Yuan Jun explained that this Taishima was too boring. It was worth sending someone else. Perhaps they could have fun with someone else. As she left, the girl said that she didn't want to watch this performance. It was already late, and therefore it was time to go home. Shouting after his acquaintance, the young man heard our hero say that he shouldn't worry about the beauty. He should always think about himself, especially since they hadn't finished their conversation yet. Turning around, with horror in his voice, the blonde asked what this boy wanted from him. The young man was in no hurry to say anything. He thought to himself that this man must definitely understand what had happened. And clenching his hand into a fist, he shouted that his only desire was to convey greetings to this Fuji from his own friends, who had done a poor job of their task. Seeing what was happening, the young man was overcome with anger and rage, and so he declared that he was not some weakling who would get scared and run away somewhere. But what happened next was something Fuji didn't expect, as his opponent easily intercepted the blow, showing that he was not who he was initially thought to be. For a moment, it seemed like time simply stood still, as the opponents did nothing in particular. Looking into our hero's eyes, the blonde stated that it turns out that he has mastered some kind of combat techniques, which is why he feels so confident. The guy didn't want to answer this man, whom he didn't consider worthy. He only smirked slightly at him. Realizing that this fight could not last forever, Yuan Jun decided to intercept his opponent's fist. It was a perfect blow to use to your advantage. This was precisely what the young man had planned to do, as he immediately bent his opponent's arm at the elbow, intending to continue this hold. The blonde understood that he was no longer in control of the situation. The main thing in this battle was now the uninvited guest. But Fuji didn't finish his thought. The guy immediately threw him over his shoulder so that he fell to the floor. Lying on the ground, the young man began to swear, realizing that some youth had overcome him. Our hero did not want to stop there. His goal was to show the man that one cannot act as vilely as he did. As for the opponent, he watched in horror as the boy's fist hit the floor, clearly missing on purpose. After this, Yuan Jun sternly declared that the blonde must definitely remember this day, the day when he deliberately missed, which almost never happens. The guy wasn't going to waste time. He knew that other things were waiting for him, and so he was already getting ready to leave. Despite everything that had happened, the blonde wasn't going to let it go. He wanted the last word to be his, and shouted that their story was just beginning. The boy would regret that he dared to hit such a great man. After some time, Suzuki's car parked next to her house. The girl wasn't going to say or explain anything. She just got out of the car and slammed the door very loudly. While the beauty was heading towards the gate, the guy thought to himself that he had no idea how to behave. As for the mistress of the house, she was holding the key in her hands, getting ready to open the door and head to her room. Grabbing his friend by the hand, the young man asked her not to leave so quickly, as he was going to talk to her. The beauty didn't like this kind of attitude towards her, and so she screamed that she didn't understand why Shizuka had become attached to her at all. Hearing the young man say that there was someone in the yard, the girl asked if it was true that he was referring to these strange people. Looking at the strangers, who had closed themselves off with curtains that looked as much like shutters as possible, the boys froze in place for a moment. After this, the owner of the house asked the guy if he really thought that these people could do them any harm. As for Suzuki, she screamed at the whole yard that she didn't understand what men were doing, and if that was the case, then she was calling a madhouse, because that's where they belonged. One of the guys immediately started talking, saying that they didn't even suspect that anyone could notice them, because this is a legendary stealth technique. The beauty said nothing. She waited for the games to end, and for these people to finish the masquerade themselves. After some time, the fabric began to rise slowly. At that very moment, the men demonstratively announced that they were the Fukuoka Trio, although this meant nothing to our hero. After this, the guys started yelling even louder that they recommended that everyone surrender, otherwise they would start a bloody massacre here. The girl thought that this unfunny comedy would end when the men threw off the sheets, but the performance had only just begun. The men realized that the boys weren't even thinking of moving from their spot, and so they assumed that no one believed them. At that very moment, one of the strangers again began to declare that there was no need to look down on them, because in reality they were strong and never lied. Yuan Jun knew he had had enough of confusing situations for today, so he wanted to sort this one out as quickly as possible. The beauty watched as her hero struck down several ill-wishers with just one movement. Moreover, the guy noted that he had once again been dealt with some weaklings, with whom it was time to finish. But the men had no intention of giving up so quickly. Instead, they began to insult our hero, claiming that he had no idea who was standing in front of them. However, the young man replied that if these people got acquainted with his fist once, they would never want to do it again. At some point, the men stopped. They realized that some kind of superhero was standing in front of them, and therefore they had to do something. And while the villains were shouting about how unlucky they were, the hostess of the house could not understand where her guest had driven these bad people. But the problems weren't over yet. Shizuka heard someone else's footsteps behind her. The frightened girl tried to understand who this man was, who only laughed evilly. With anger in his voice, the ill-wisher said that the guys probably thought that there were 3 of them, but they were mistaken, because there were 4 of them. Suddenly, the villain felt someone hit him with all his might. He didn't understand who it could be. Our hero, who by that time had already managed to deal with other opponents, now returned to defeat another one. Yuan Jun gained momentum and declared that he was fed up with all of this, and was going to end this battle as soon as possible. A couple of minutes later, the young man approached the girl and asked if everything was okay with her. But instead of understanding, the beauty angrily declared that she did not like the hand of the young man who was doing something wrong. The guy didn't immediately realize what was happening, and so he didn't do anything for a while. Although the very next moment, running to the side, he asked for forgiveness for what happened, saying that it was the most ordinary accident, after which he added that Suzuka's figure was really beautiful. But the mistress of the house decided that this was an insult, realizing that this guy was clearly constantly studying her, and so she hit him with all her might. A few minutes later, a young man who entered the house asked the beauty not to be so harsh with him, because it was simply unfair. Exhausted, our hero sat on the floor, leaning against a small table. The young man thought to himself that this day had started out so well for him, but then some kind of madness began. At this time, Yuan Jun heard the phone ring. It was his new acquaintance's father, who was happily talking about how he had a great son-in-law. But the young man replied that there was no point in pretending and asked the man to contact his father and inform him that the contract was canceled. Despite this, the owner of the house said that the boy was like a son to him and asked him to look after his daughter. And he immediately added that he had some things to do now, and when he returned, they would definitely talk about everything. Upon hearing that the young man had been attacked, the man became frightened, but when he heard that everything had turned out well, the owner of the house added that he believed in the young man and therefore asked him not to rush into leaving. After which he once again asked this boy to protect his daughter while he was on a business trip. The young man wanted to say something, but he was in no hurry, trying to find the right words. But the man again and again asked that his foreign acquaintance stay with them, adding that the reward would be appropriate. The guy didn't want to let this man down and said that he would do absolutely everything in his power. Suddenly, Suzuka entered the room and shouted loudly that she didn't understand something. The young man looked closely at the beauty, who had already managed to change her clothes and was now looking at the young man with an angry gaze. The girl told her father that if the contract was canceled, then there was no point in this man staying in their house. Moreover, he was no protector. Therefore, it was better for her to stay alone. Hearing such a remark, the guy wanted to say something, but he did not dare, considering that the mistress of this house was capable of a lot. But realizing that he didn't want Suzuka to look stupid, he explained to her that her father had already hung up. After some time, the car was racing through the city at high speed. The girl and her friend were driving in an unknown direction, and they were silent the whole way. Getting out of the car, the young man complained about the beauty driving around the city like that, adding that he could get hurt, although he didn't want that. However, Suzuka calmly explained that there was no need to worry about this. Everyone in the city was already used to her driving and knew her car very well. Deciding to joke, our hero said that driving could be considered his new acquaintance's middle name. Hearing Yuan-jun muttering something under his breath about the beauty's driving, she asked what he was dissatisfied with again. The guy didn't want to continue this argument and asked about where they had arrived now. The girl saw no point in hiding anything, explaining that she needed to take part in the auction. And she thought to herself that she would never have taken this foreigner with her if her father had not asked him to stay for a while. Looking at the beauty, the guy thought that she was actually very cute when she was angry like this. Seeing that Suzuka had already gone inside, the young man hurried after her, as he didn't want her to be left alone. Suddenly, the security guard standing at the door announced that the guy could not enter because they had strict rules and, first of all, the guest had to dress stylishly. The guy didn't fully understand what they wanted from him, so he explained that he would just pull up his pants and look like the other guests. But instead of giving a detailed explanation, the guard began to mock Yuan-jun, hinting that he had no money, and therefore what would such a person be doing in an auction house? And a moment later, he added that even if the guests looked normal, he apparently still did not have an invitation to the event. The young man tried to say that he came here together with Suzuka from the Guben group, but then something happened that our hero did not expect, because the girl walked past her acquaintance as if she had never seen him before. Wenjun tried to look inside the room, hoping that the beauty would change her mind and return. The employee, realizing that he had been deceived, screamed at the top of his voice that in front of him was a liar who had never even stood with this beautiful lady before. Our hero knew that he absolutely had to come up with something in order to enter the building. And then on the fly, he came up with the idea that this miss was too shy to be with him in public. The young man had a plan, so he suddenly shouted that they were going to do something interesting with Suzuka after this auction. The beauty did not want to compromise herself in any way. She turned around abruptly and declared that she had forgotten something. Returning, the girl was angry that everything had turned out this way, but she understood that it was imperative to save the situation. Grabbing the young man by the collar, Suzuka said that he was her bodyguard, whom she had not intended to show, but now she had to do so. The security guard nervously replied that if that was the case, then the guest could, of course, bring this man into the building. Once inside, Yuan-jun noted to himself that this place looked rich. Everything was arranged with expertise. In addition to the music playing in the hall, there was also a buffet table with a variety of delicious dishes. The young man immediately noticed this and began to say that this was something amazing. Complaining, the guy explained that he hadn't eaten all day, although he was very hungry. But the beauty said that her friend was nothing but trouble, and therefore warned the young man to think first and then do something. But our hero didn't listen to her, and all because the aroma of freshly prepared food was spreading throughout the hall, and it was impossible to resist. Heading towards one of the tables, the young man shouted that he could not wait any longer, without even thinking to listen to what the girl was saying. Within a minute, the young man came across a long line. Yuan-jun said out loud that he didn't believe that all these people wanted to eat. Besides, the tables were freely accessible, so why was it necessary to stand? And only Suzuku was not interested in this. On the contrary, she was glad that this man had disappeared from her sight and of his own free will. Standing in front of the plate of food, the guy looked at her as if he had never seen anything like it. But the guy was amazed not only by this, but also by the original presentation, because the dish was not placed in a tartlet, but simply lay on a plate. Realizing that there was a lot of this snack, the young man decided to help himself to a little more. As Yuan-jun walked into the hall, he could hear the guests behind him rejoicing because it was finally their turn. However, when they approached the table, the young people began to scream loudly because what was on the plate was not what they had expected. The upset guests were annoyed because the food was somehow strange, and they discussed among themselves that it seemed as if they had come not to an expensive auction house, but straight to a landfill. And only our hero was happy, holding a plate of caviar in his hands, however, After eating a little, he now looked around for his acquaintance, who was nowhere to be seen. Continuing to move around the room with the plate, the young man persistently tried to find Suzuka, realizing that she could not have left. At the same time, the girl was glad that in this room it was easy to hide from the uncultured guy who irritated her a lot. Suddenly, the beauty heard someone address her in a friendly manner. A young man and a girl stood in front of her. They stated that they had not seen each other for a long time. Having recognized the guy as Kuroki, our hero's friend screamed that she did not understand why he had come to this auction house. The brunette immediately made a displeased face, saying that Suzuka was incredibly rude to her classmate. But the beauty explained that this vile man had been rude to so many people that it would be impossible to even count all the cases. And so she quickly turned around and walked away, adding that she was not interested in these individuals. Therefore, there was no point in wasting her precious time on them. The young man did not like this kind of treatment, and he angrily shouted at his former classmate not to rush to go anywhere. To make his words sound more convincing, Kuroki blocked his friend's path. Suzuka asked in an icy tone if the slow-witted man hadn't immediately grasped the meaning of her words. At this point, a brunette joined the conversation and explained that the young Mr. Yamamoto, the son of the owner of the Yamaki General Consortium, was interested in the beauty, and that this would be a good deal for the Guben Group. The young man added that perhaps this sounded a little pompous, although such things could be discussed after the auction, at the party he was throwing for the elite. And again, our hero's friend said that she didn't have time to waste on all sorts of nonsense. The girl standing next to Kuragi stated that one does not simply refuse the young master's offer. However, the beauty replied that she was not some kind of girl from the port, and therefore knew what kind of parties were usually being talked about. And once again, she screamed loudly for this couple to leave her alone. The brunette seemed not to hear what was being said to her, declaring that refusing the gentleman was the same as refusing the Yamaki company, and that the Guben Group would certainly not be happy about something like that. Suzuka was a little embarrassed. She didn't know what was the best thing to do in this situation, although she definitely didn't plan to give in. Kuroki didn't want it to look so rude, so he pointed out that he shouldn't insist, as it might give the impression that he was some kind of tyrant. Taking the girl by the hand, her former classmate explained that they would simply relax and have a good time, and that it certainly wouldn't hurt. And after a short pause, he added that after this, the company of the beauty and her father would not only be rich, but also famous. Suzuka said in an icy tone that she had heard of such tales before, but this time it wouldn't work. Unexpectedly for everyone, a large plate of caviar appeared on the ill-wisher's head, which was now slowly dripping down the guest's face. The brunette tried to say something, but she was in such shock that she realized any words would be superfluous. Suzuka knew this too, and she was trying to understand what had happened. The angry young man, realizing that he looked more stupid than ever, began to mutter something under his breath. At this moment, Yuan Jun, throwing up his hands, said that he was very sorry because he did not want to harm anyone. Making a stupid face, the young man explained that the plate had simply slipped from his hand, and its subsequent fate was unknown. The Yamamoto family representative fell silent for a moment, realizing that he needed to somehow get out of this situation gracefully. But anger got the better of him, and so he ran up to the guy, grabbed him by the jacket, and yelled that he would tear him into little pieces. The assistant knew that there were a lot of people gathered around, and so she tried to explain to the young man that he could not behave in such a way. At that very moment, the people gathered in the hall, hearing the shouts, immediately began to discuss the latest events among themselves, wanting to be aware of everything. Kuroki understood that in a little while these gentlemen from high society would begin to discuss him and his base actions, and so he remained silent for a while, until the brunette asked the security to come to her. At that very second, everyone froze in anticipation of what would unfold next. Approaching the guest, the security guard asked how he could help her. Pointing at our hero, the young lady shouted loudly that this gentleman did not comply with the dress code, therefore he must be immediately escorted out of the room. Suzuka, who in another situation would never have stood up for her friend, now explained that he was her man and therefore did not understand why he should go anywhere. The ill-wisher demonstratively explained that it turns out that the Guben Group is so large and influential that it no longer needs to adhere to the general rules. Perhaps this quarrel would have continued for a very long time if an elderly man had not intervened and asked everyone to calm down and pull themselves together. Our heroine's classmates immediately fell silent when they saw who was standing in front of them. The guys did the same, freezing in place since there was some very important person in front of him. Suzuka immediately exclaimed that it was Uncle Iwata, and she was glad that he was here. The old man turned to Mr. Yamamoto, saying that the auction would soon begin, and by then the guest would have to change his clothes. It would be unwise for him to miss such a noble event because of such a trifle. As he left, Kuroki angrily told the boy not to think that it was all over, that this was just the beginning. As for the girl, she hurried to her uncle, asking how he was feeling and what was new with him. Yuanjun wasn't interested in such conversations. He decided that he needed to ease his sadness with another plate of caviar, but he didn't get far. At that very moment, he felt someone's hand grab his wrist. The young man did not understand what was happening. He turned around to ask what was wrong. Mr. Iwata explained in a soft voice that there was a certain etiquette to the auction and immediately asked the guest to follow him. Our hero did not want to argue, realizing that a respected person stood in front of him. Turning around, the old man told the beauty not to worry about her fiancé. He would not do anything bad to him. The embarrassed girl immediately told her uncle that this young man was not even her lover, let alone anything more. But Iwata didn't care. He clearly liked the young man with whom he was already talking about something. The indignant Suzuka was angry that this old man never listened to anyone to the end, which was very annoying. After some time, guests began to gather in the hall where the auction was to take place. Looking through the catalog, Suzuka was surprised that her father had rather strange preferences. The piece of art her father wanted to buy was not only ugly, it could even be called ugly. Covering her eyes with her hand, the beauty said out loud that this was not the first time she had thought that this world had actually gone mad. The girl, interrupting her work, told the young man who sat next to her that the seat was occupied and that the guest should therefore move. But the stranger was silent and simply smiled. It seemed that he knew his neighbor well. Suzuka herself realized this a moment later and screamed that she simply couldn't believe her eyes, as this couldn't possibly be happening. Yuanjun, who now looked like a gentleman belonging to high society, looked at the girl attentively. Realizing that his friend couldn't believe what she saw in front of her, the guy asked again if she liked his new look. Turning away, the beauty proudly declared that she was sorry that only her clothes had changed, everything else remained the same. The young man decided to joke, and immediately noted that he could see from the girl that she actually really liked this change. But the conversation could not be continued. The next minute, the host appeared on stage, greeted everyone gathered, and apologized for the slight delay. Smiling, Mr. Iwata said again that he hoped that this auction would be beneficial for each and everyone. And then he shouted loudly that their event was about to begin, therefore everyone needed to get ready. At that moment, a young man approached the old man and explained that everything was ready. Taking the place of the elderly gentleman, the gentleman explained that his name was Sato and that he would be the auctioneer for the evening. He then presented the first lot, which originates from the Yin dynasty. The vase is decorated with an image of plum branches. And after a slight pause, he added that the starting price was at 3 million. Suddenly, one of the guests stood up from his seat and offered a little more than 3 million. The next guest stated that he was ready to pay 3.5 million for this beautiful specimen. It seemed that many people were interested in the vase, because a moment later, another visitor offered his bid. At some point, the bid reached 5 million, which was a good price for such an antique. Our hero said that he didn't even think that everyone needed such an item, having heard that the vase was not bad, but it could be considered an appetizer before the main lot. The beauty knew for sure that the price would not rise above 10 million because she had been to such events many times before. And at that very moment, in fact, one of the guests shouted that he wanted to offer 10 million for the copy. Sato explained that this was the highest bid so far, and he was wondering if anyone would be willing to outbid him. But it seemed that no one else had any desire to bargain, because this item was not worth more. Suddenly, the auctioneer banged his gavel on the podium, asking if there were any more bids. There was complete silence in the room. Those gathered clearly expected that this lot would be finished, and they would be able to move on to the next one. After this, Sato solemnly announced that the vase was sold. Trying to identify the buyer, the girl noted that she had never seen this man, although our hero immediately stated that he was the heir to a very large and wealthy family. Suzuka had already thought that the guy might know this stranger, but he explained that someone who was willing to pay 4 million more was not an ordinary person. He clearly belonged to the wealthy class. Now, the beauty was interested in how her friend knew that the real value of this vase was 6 million. Smiling, the young man replied that he knew several such things and had seen them once. Turning away, the beauty again said that only a fool would believe something that the boy had just made up on the fly. Our hero didn't argue, but there was no need to, since the event's host had already said that the painting in front of them was created in France in the mid-18th century. Its name is Game of Colors, and many would like to become the owner of such a masterpiece. For this reason, the starting price for the painting is at 10 million, and anyone interested can begin bidding. Suddenly, one of the guests immediately offered a price of 15 million. Another girl sitting behind said that she was ready to pay 20 million for the masterpiece. Within a moment, the room became so noisy that it was impossible to accurately hear the amounts the participants were naming, since the numbers were constantly changing and, of course, increasing. When it seemed that no one would beat the 35 million price, a voice was heard shouting that he was offering a whole 60 million for the lot. Upon hearing such a price, the participants immediately turned their heads in the direction of the voice to see who dared to name such a price. Suzuka held up her number triumphantly, knowing she had to buy this painting. Sato understood that it was unlikely that any of the guests would name a higher sum, and so he immediately began counting. The girl was silent. She was almost sure that this copy would go to her, although inside there were still some doubts about it. And it was not in vain, because a moment later those gathered heard someone shout that he was ready to pay 70 million. The frightened beauty now did not believe that anyone was willing to pay 10 million more for this masterpiece than she had offered. Kuroki, who was sitting nearby, now made a satisfied face, showing with his whole appearance that the item would go to him. This situation made our hero's friend extremely angry, and so she shouted that he had planned all this on purpose. Yuan Jun, who was sitting next to her, asked the beauty to calm down, explaining that her former classmate was deliberately making her angry and irritated. But instead of understanding, the girl raised her number again, and this time shouted that she was paying 80 million for the painting. The brunette sitting next to Mr. Yamamoto said that this girl really succumbed to this provocation, putting herself in a bad light. The young man said in a quiet voice that they wanted to bring this fool to her knees, and therefore they would raise the stakes again. Raising her hand, the brunette shouted that she was ready to pay 100 million for the masterpiece. The auctioneer didn't believe what he was hearing, but he once again told the audience that the bidding was continuing and had reached a fairly high level. Yuan Jun asked his friend to calm down. He noted that the price had long since exceeded the real value. There was no point in bargaining. It was still not worth it. Realizing that the girl was not in control of herself, since she was thinking only about revenge, the young man took her hand. And then he repeated once again what had already been said earlier. You shouldn't play by the rules of these bad people. The beauty explained in a nervous voice that she could not give up so easily, because these bad people were already so pleased with themselves that she felt sick, and what would follow next. The young man knew it was stupid, but he also knew that he simply had to do something in this situation, since he had promised the girl's father that he would take care of her. Therefore, Yuan Jun said again very calmly, the only thing he could do was to end this whole circus. Raising his friend's hand, our hero suddenly shouted to everyone that he was raising the bet to 150 million. People who had already been surprised now looked at each other in horror. The guests couldn't understand what was going on, as they had never seen anything like this before, and they couldn't understand why anyone would want a painting that wasn't worth even half that amount. For a moment, people thought this was pure madness and that no one would pay that amount. And only the auctioneer once again announced that the current bid was 150 million, and if anyone wanted to outbid it, they had to do so immediately. At that moment, Kuroki looked askance at our hero and said that this boy reminded him very much of someone. The brunette replied that this was the same uncouth young man they had met in the main hall, only now he looked different. The young man was angry and said that sooner or later he would get to the one who humiliated him in front of all the guests. At this time, the beauty asked her friend if he had gone crazy, why he had added so much, and heard that it was just a game. The boy was clearly enjoying this, so he turned to Mr. Yamamoto, who was sitting in front. The ill-wisher looked at the boys attentively, but was in no hurry to say anything. And at that moment, Yuan Jun spoke up, not in the most polite manner, addressing the man, saying that the rich man should now name his price. After this, taking his friend by the shoulder, the young man declared that it was now her turn, although the beauty could not understand anything. But things didn't stop there, because our hero pressed the girl closer to him and even pretended to want to kiss her. Suzuka was already at her limit, and after this she even declared that this boy had lost all shame. To make sure the young man understood the meaning of her words, the girl hit him with all her might, saying that he had completely forgotten where he was. Suddenly, the guy shouted that his friend had misunderstood him and that he was doing all this just to anger Yamamoto even more and make him do really stupid things. They need her former classmate to lose control and start raising the stakes to incredible heights. The young man explained that up until this point, the ill-wisher had been at the helm, directing the process, but now the price had skyrocketed. Despite the detailed explanations, the beauty seemed not to understand at all what her acquaintance was leading her to. Realizing that an explanation was needed, Yuan Jun once again said that such tricks have the strongest psychological effect on men. And it was true, because Kuroki was indeed seething with anger, but he pretended that nothing terrible was happening. At the same time, the young man was thinking about how best to act now, since this boy had raised the bet by 50 million. The assistant sitting nearby noted that if they didn't do anything, these fools would have to pay an order of magnitude more, since everyone had a rough idea of the painting's real value. Our hero's friend realized that nothing was happening. She also knew that just a little bit more, and the lot would be sold, but the young man did not plan to give up so easily. Hearing that the guy wanted to anger his opponent even more, the girl became a little tense because she didn't know about the plans. Hugging the beauty as tightly as possible, our hero looked at her carefully. And then he asked how that poor fool could even bother her, since he still had a lot of growing to do to become such an ideal friend. Kuroki turned his head nervously. He understood that they were talking specifically about him, and therefore it was necessary to do something urgently. As for our hero, he continued to say that he loved Suzuka so much that he would do everything possible to get this ancient painting for her. Realizing that the young man was holding her on his lap, the beauty asked him not to drop her by accident. Mr. Yamamoto didn't think he would witness something like this, and so the anger inside him grew stronger and stronger with each passing minute. To further escalate the situation, our hero showed his opponent the middle finger, declaring that not only was he a beggar, but he also wore glasses, and who would even pay attention to someone like that? The young man shouted, declaring that since the boy was ready to do anything for his former classmate, he would do everything to thwart all his plans. Raising his hand, an enraged Kuroki declared that he was ready to pay 200 million for the masterpiece. The auctioneer couldn't believe his ears. He once again informed everyone that one of the gentlemen had raised his bid on the painting. A joyful Yuan Jun told his friend that she didn't believe him that the ill-wisher would raise the stake, but he did. Having hit the young man with all her might, the beauty said that if they had succeeded, then why was she still sitting on her knees? Scratching his sore cheek, the young man heard Sato begin counting, noting that there were no more people willing to bargain for now. Rising from his seat, our hero turned to Mr. Yamamoto, saying that it was a good bet, and he hoped that the man was now pleased with this priceless work of art. With anger in his voice, Kuroki immediately began to insult the guy, realizing what had happened. After which, turning around, he shouted that he would immediately finish off this arrogant boy. The brunette, who was worried about the authority of the great family, again asked the young man to calm down, saying that the hour of reckoning would definitely come. And so I reminded them once again that they should be more restrained, because for them, reputation plays a key role. Realizing that this was indeed true, the opponent immediately returned to his place. Although one of the most expensive lots had been sold, the auction did not end there, and the host announced that the next item had come from the Yan dynasty. Yuan Jun knew that this golden toad was created for Emperor Li Shimin and was considered one of the reigning regalia of the Yan dynasty. As for Sato, he explained that viewers will be able to take a closer look at the object to see even the smallest detail. Getting up from his seat, the guy said that he was interested in this lot and wanted to get to know it as well as possible. The beauty did not understand what could be interesting about a toad and said so. But the young man did not want to waste time on explanations. The subject was more important to him than empty talk. And Suzuka muttered under her breath that this was some kind of mystery. Many spectators were interested in this lot, and therefore almost everyone stood up from their seats to take a closer look at this masterpiece as well. Some men came up with magnifying glasses and remarked that it was definitely gold. Although there were those who stated that this toad still looked cheap, you couldn't tell that it belonged to any dynasty. The young man noted to himself that, indeed, on the one hand, this object looked too ordinary, but on the other hand, there was something that caught his attention. Suddenly, our hero's eyes opened wide and he seemed to see something unusual. At one point, it seemed as if the toad began to shimmer with a golden glow. And again, Yuan Jun thought to himself that now many things had become clear to him, and it was amazing. But for some reason, the guy decided not to think about it, realizing that the best decision would be to return to his place. Suzuka, despite pretending that the boy didn't understand anything, still asked what he saw and whether he considered the specimen valuable. Smiling, the young man said knowledgeably that this thing was very expensive. Seeing his acquaintance's displeased face, the young man still offered to make a small bet, although the beauty did not understand whether there was any point in this. Yuan Jun explained that the girl would still have to pay the auction advance. If the market price was higher than the auction price, she would only profit. If the price was lower, he would compensate her for the losses double. Suzuka looked askance at the young man, asking what was going on in his head. Although he didn't answer, he only wondered why the beauty was worried, since she really had nothing to lose. Realizing that she didn't want to argue and that she just wanted to see what would come of it, the girl decided to agree. At that very moment, the auctioneer announced that it was a golden toad from the Yan dynasty, with a starting price of 10 million. Our hero wasn't going to wait for the bidding to begin. He took the initiative himself, shouting that he was ready to pay that amount. Sato was delighted that there was already the first person who wanted to make an acquisition, and hinted to the others that they could miss out on a unique opportunity. Those gathered in the hall had no intention of bargaining. Instead, they began to actively discuss something among themselves. Some were even discouraged. It seemed that people were not very fond of this statue. Suddenly, Tezuka screamed that it was just a stupid golden frog, and therefore she didn't understand what they were doing. Turning towards our hero, the girl asked if he at least knew the history of this relic. And I heard that, according to legend, the Tibetan king came to China to the palace of the Yin dynasty to get married. As a result, Li Qimin married Princess Yunyan. Hearing the guy say something incomprehensible, the beauty declared that it was all nonsense. But the young man added that later this princess would be known as Wencheng. But a moment later, our hero's friend thought that she would still like to know how the story ended. Without waiting for a question, the young man added that, according to the remaining records, it is known that the princess's dowry is measured not in quantity, but in kilometers in length. This toad is part of those treasures. The beauty didn't understand why she hadn't heard anything about it, but the guy explained that the problem was authenticity, since too many fakes had been made since then. That is why many do not trust the usual markings that prove belonging to dynastic treasures. There are other thoughts on this matter, for example, a complete denial of the wedding, because how could two families who hated each other become so close? There are other interesting stories, but they are too long. Despite all these stories, the girls still did not understand why they were bargaining over this toad if they had no idea whether it was genuine. And while the guys were talking, they heard someone's voice offering 15 million for the artifact. It was still the same Mr. Yamamoto, who still couldn't calm down and continued to use his superiority. Yuan Jun folded his arms and declared that this man was in his spirit and probably could not be changed. However, the young man was not going to give up, and so he raised the bet to 20 million. The enemy stood his ground and shouted that he was ready to pay 25 million for this frog. As for our hero, he fell silent for a moment and sighed heavily. The guy was in no hurry to take any action, but then he raised his hand and shouted loudly that he was going to give 50,000 for this relic. While everything was clear with the painting, no one doubted its authenticity. The toad was a completely different story. People didn't understand the point of paying so much money for a trinket. Not understanding what was happening, Suzuka began to yell at her friend, declaring that he had definitely gone crazy, although the guy said that this thing was priceless. And then he added that it would be best for the beauty to pay attention to the clown who was sitting in front of them. The opponent was angry because he could not understand the purpose of this bidding, whether the guys really wanted to buy the frog or were just playing a game again. That's why Kuroki asked the brunette how much his figurine might actually cost. Hearing that the toad's price was below 30 million, the young man muttered through his teeth that he knew the boy was bluffing. At that very moment, the presenter slammed his fist on the table and announced to everyone present that this lot had been sold. Yamamoto was glad that everything had turned out this way, knowing that this time no one would dare make a fool out of him. Suddenly, Yuan Jun raised his hand and shouted at the host not to rush into continuing this event. And he immediately added that he was going to conduct an additional cost assessment in order to understand what he was planning to pay for. This time, the visitors were even more surprised because no one had previously questioned the auction's appraisal committee. The guy bid 50 million and believed he had bought some kind of treasure, after which people added that every year there is some fool who behaves in a similar way. Jumping up from his seat, Mr. Yamamoto noted that the boy should understand that this was a very ordinary golden figurine and nothing more, and therefore there was no need to pay so much attention to it. However, our hero replied in a calm tone that no one should care about his purchases, after which he turned to Mr. Iwata, who was also in the room and knew the rules of auction houses very well. The old man immediately stood up and explained that there was nothing unusual about this. In fact, every buyer has the right to ask for a revaluation. This is common practice. The man said that they would now inspect the lot again, and after that they would announce the current price for this item. Smiling, the young man explained that he would not argue even if the price turned out to be slightly lower than what was originally stated. The owner of the auction house approached Takanaka, saying that they would need his help today. The old man muttered under his breath that he didn't understand why the same thing happened every year, since they weren't in a circus to see things like that. Realizing that the event could not be delayed, Takanaka announced that anyone interested could come and observe the reevaluation. Just a moment later, when everyone gathered approached the table, the assessor said that they could now begin. This is an ancient Chinese golden toad from the Yuan dynasty, and it is well preserved. The buyer was probably not very lucky, because this thing weighs very little and the design is very simple. The market price is about 25 million. The surprised girl said that this gentleman had just hinted that they had given away the extra 25 million for nothing. Turning to Takanaka, the young man said that he was quite knowledgeable about Chinese history and ancient artifacts, but Takanaka indifferently stated that flattery would not help in raising the price. Suddenly, the guy said in a cold tone that, unfortunately, the appraiser had not checked all the details. The old man didn't like that someone was talking to him in that tone, so he asked what was wrong. A moment later, our hero turned to Mr. Iwata and asked him to provide him with a bottle of water heated to about 45 degrees. Those gathered did not understand what was about to happen, but the young man explained that everyone would soon see what was wrong here. A few minutes later, the bowl of water was already on the table, and all the guests held their breath. Taking the toad statue in his hands, Yuan Jun said that the secret would be revealed in the light. After that, the guy threw this figurine into the water, which looked extremely strange. People understood that this was not just a coincidence and believed that water could somehow change the golden figurine. The appraiser himself had never seen anything like it. He couldn't even imagine that anyone would come up with something like that. The guests didn't like what was happening and said that they hadn't come here to play, and therefore it was time to end it. At that very moment, Takanaka thought of something unusual. It seemed like he understood something. Suddenly, those gathered announced that they could see the toad reacting to what was happening. People really felt like this statue had come to life, although it was something completely unusual. But there was no limit to the surprise when people saw that something began to emerge from this toad. At that very second, the young man took out something unusual, although not everyone immediately realized what it was. For a moment, there was complete silence in the room. Those gathered wanted to say something, but did not know whether it would be appropriate. Although at that very moment Yuan Jun explained that the real treasure was not the frog, but what he now held in his hands. The appraiser, his mouth open in surprise, shouted that this simply couldn't be true, because what lay before them was ancient jade. Smiling, the young man stated that Mr. Takanaka had a very keen eye for all things precious. The crushed man, covering his face with his hands, declared that he had had enough of this for today. Realizing that the estimate was not yet complete, the employee informed everyone that they had made a mistake during the initial cost estimate, for which they now apologized. The current price of this golden toad is 500 million, and now this can be said with certainty. Hearing about this, people almost fell out of their seats. It seemed to them that nothing could cost so much. The guests walked around the room and tried to understand how such an ordinary and unremarkable toad could cost such a huge amount of money. At the same time, a stranger approached the young man, saying that it was rare to see him like this. He only noted that they were obliged to find out everything about this boy, and therefore it was very important to collect all the information about him. After some time, the auction was completed, and the guests gradually began to disperse. Our hero, stretching out his arms, said that he had enjoyed the event and would therefore have to go again sometime, but he heard a friend remark that he would not always be so lucky. The guy didn't have time to answer, because at that moment someone turned to the young man and asked him to spare a minute of his time. Yuan Jun didn't know what else to expect from this evening, so he turned and looked at the people standing in front of him with some attention. The strangers noted that they had also been at the auction, but would now like to talk to the guy. In response to the young man's question about who these strangers were, the guys introduced themselves. It turned out that the girl's name was Shen Yue, and her friend's name was Li Zheng. When the young man heard the names of these people, he immediately said that they were Chinese, which was quite strange, since he also came from the same country. The auction guest wanted to talk to our hero, but he looked attentively at his companion, as if expecting her approval. As she was leaving, the beauty explained that she would wait in the car, but at the same time hoped that the guy wouldn't need too much time to talk. Li Jing himself said that they also needed to go, and so they were not going to drag out the conversation for long. And then he said that they needed the young man to sell the toad that he had bought that evening at the event. Yuan Jun folded his hand and tried to figure out why he had to do this at all. The young man explained that the guy probably noticed that they bought almost all the Chinese antiques at the auction. Their job is to buy such things with the aim of returning them to their homeland. Our hero asked if it was true that the guys were working for the government, but they rudely replied that it didn't matter. Embarrassed, the guy replied that since they didn't trust each other, in that case, he wanted to refuse. The girl understood that now was the time for her to intervene. She said that they would offer a sum that a citizen of their country would not be able to refuse, and this deal would certainly please both parties. However, Yuan Jun was not interested in this at all. He turned around and, as he left, explained that he could take this relic back to his homeland himself. Li Zheng hoped that the assistant would at least know a little about this boy, but she explained that anything other than this man's name was of no value. Although she then added that they would definitely get to the bottom of the truth in order to ultimately take this valuable thing. Watching our hero leave, the boys realize that a person can't just buy something without understanding what's inside. And so they suspected that the guy wasn't as simple as he seemed. The young man had already reached the parking lot, but suddenly stopped because he saw the bespectacled man in front of him. Adjusting his glasses, Mr. Yamamoto told his former classmate that they would see each other again very soon. After that, he turned to the brunette, noting that they had done everything they wanted, and now it was time for them to leave. Our hero heard this entire conversation. Despite this, he did not even think of interfering, realizing that now was not the time to sort things out. Yuenjun didn't understand what these people wanted, but the beauty explained that they invited her to participate in car racing. Looking at the girl in surprise, the young man shouted that she shouldn't tell him now that she had agreed, because that would be pure madness. But Suzuka proudly declared that she would say exactly that, because she was the racing queen of their city. Suddenly, our hero's acquaintance attacked him with her fists. She said that she wanted to know what this boy had come up with again. And then she added that she didn't even think about driving the car herself. The thing is that she knows one street racer. His name is Fujiwara Takuma. He is the best in this business. The young man wanted to know if he could be trusted, and Shizuka explained that this man had won hundreds of races already, and he could definitely be trusted. And while the young man was thinking that there was definitely some kind of catch to this, the beauty said that since her friend had helped her with the auction, then as a token of gratitude, she would take him with her. After some time, the car was already driving along the highway in the direction where the race was supposed to take place. They didn't have to travel far, and soon the young people noticed other participants who had already gathered at the designated location. Our heroes didn't jump to any conclusions about whether they had made a mistake, so they simply parked first. And while the young man was explaining that this place was very noisy, the beauty was explaining that this was the holy of holies of illegal racers. However, the acquaintances did not have time to finish speaking, because the next moment a familiar voice was heard calling out to the girl. It was a classmate and his assistant who remarked that they hadn't expected to see Suzuka here, thinking that she would chicken out as usual. The beauty grinned and noted that she didn't understand what they were talking about, since she always arrived on time for such events. At that very second, the girl noticed some guy who was standing nearby. Waving her hand, the racing enthusiast asked Fujiwara to come over to them, since they had already arrived. The blonde didn't show any emotion, although he recognized Shizuka, and he even said that he was glad to see her. Our hero observed a strange scene where his acquaintance was literally trying her best to find out if the agreement was still valid, and the young man simply looked at the beauty with indifference. At some point, Yu and Jun even thought that this guy wasn't interested in this at all, which is why he was acting this way. And it was true. Bowing his head, the young man explained that he had already been hired by Mr. Yamamoto, therefore he asked for forgiveness for how everything turned out. After a short pause, he added that he had returned the money to the account, so the racer need not worry about it, although money was the last thing she thought about. The brunette overheard this conversation and, as usual, decided to intervene, asking what problems had arisen. And a moment later, she declared that Suzuka shouldn't think that she was the smartest person in these parts. There were other people who could boast of their intelligence. Our hero's friend didn't want to give in. She offered to double Fujiwara's rate, but he refused, explaining that he had been given a good offer he couldn't refuse. Laughing, the bespectacled man said that his former classmate was going to measure her wallets with the wrong person. But the beauty said that there was no need to rejoice prematurely. Of course, a blonde man might play for them, but her team still wouldn't lose. The brunette wanted to humiliate the guys. She asked where the glorious racer was, and pointing at Yu and Jun, said that he was definitely not a boy. The young man understood that they were being mocked, and therefore thought to himself that these were even more rotten people than he had previously thought. As she walked away, Suzuka shouted that she never needed helpers. Moreover, she always knew how to solve her problems herself. Having hit the ill-wisher on the shoulder, the beauty cursed so that everyone could hear. Getting into the car, the girl explained that the blonde man was, of course, an excellent racer. But despite this, the car was still better than hers in all respects. The guy was sure that his friend would let him drive the car, but he realized that she didn't even listen to him. Looking out the window, the young man noted that the girl was too self-confident, but this was not always to his advantage. Sometimes it greatly interfered with seeing the real state of affairs. But at that moment, it didn't matter to Suzuki. Just like during the auction, she only saw the goal and didn't even think about what might happen next. At that moment, the brunette, sitting in a car that was parked nearby, said in a venomous tone that when her opponent lost, she would have to fulfill one condition. Our hero asked with horror what they were talking about, and his friend replied that the loser would do whatever the winner wanted. Imagining his friend in a nightgown, The guy asked again whether it would really be possible to ask for absolutely anything he wanted. Grabbing the young man by the collar, the beauty asked him what he was thinking about at that moment, hearing that the race was already starting and that he needed to focus on it. The girl who was supposed to signal the start of the race was already ready, holding a flag in her hands. In a sly tone, the stranger asked a rhetorical question about whether the participants of the race were ready for this interesting adventure. Of course, the drivers didn't answer, but they looked not only wary, but also stern. At that moment, waving the flag, the girl shouted that the race was beginning. Suddenly, the cars took off at the same time and started driving as fast as they could. The blonde man who was fighting for the opposing team understood that he had been paid a lot of money and therefore was obliged to win. The young man didn't want to let his client down, so he stepped on the gas and even pulled ahead slightly. Spectators said that Fujiwara was a real handsome man and a professional in his field. Moreover, the Porsche brand in this case was much better than Koenigsegg. At that moment, Kuroki thought that they had modified the body and engine, especially for the race. And it had its effect. It was not for nothing that the blonde said that at the next turn he wouldn't even see his rival in the mirror. Yuenjun watched his friend closely, but his expression was very wary, unlike her, who was clearly about to show who was the best on this track. This was not bad, although the downside was that the girl did not calculate her strength. She also did not take into account many important nuances. As for driving the beauty, it was so extreme that it is impossible to even describe. That's why the guy sitting in the passenger seat thought that everything was happening exactly as he imagined. At the same time, the opponent actually managed to pull away, although not by much. Fujiwara, who was no less self-confident than his opponent, was sure that it was impossible to catch up with him. But after looking in the mirror, he became very wary. The reason was that the red car not only caught up with his car, but was practically ready to overtake it. The brunette, who had decided to be nearby, asked him fearfully if the situation was under control, since it seemed to him that it was not at all. The young man was scared. He really understood that his rival could easily overtake him at any moment. Despite this, he stated that there was no need to worry, as he would do everything in the best possible way. But the girl did not hear the words. She began to threaten, although the guy continued to convince her that he had never lost before. The brunette was angry, thinking to herself that this fool didn't even understand what Mr. Yamamoto would do to him if they didn't win. However, she didn't want to take any risks, so the passenger had already started looking for something on her phone. The expression on her face was extremely serious. It seemed that this bad girl had a backup plan. At that very moment, she began setting up geolocation on her phone, although it was difficult to understand why this was necessary. Suddenly, an explosion thundered, and our heroes only had time to notice that some kind of device seemed to have been embedded in the rock, stones from which were already falling to the ground. Everything happened so quickly that the guys didn't know how to react to this event. Because the boulders flying down were huge and the car was not as strong as everyone thought, the decision had to be made quickly, as this situation threatened serious consequences. Fortunately, Yuenjun didn't lose his composure and quickly began to turn the steering wheel so that the car would not be damaged. And this yielded results. At the moment when the car moved forward a little, a huge stone fell onto the roadway. What is interesting is that the young people found themselves trapped because the rock blocked the road not only from behind, but also from in front. Watching what was happening in horror, the frightened girl tried to understand what they should do now. And only our hero, with a trembling voice, noted that the danger was as close as ever. Suzuka stated that this trap was most likely set by an acquaintance of Yamamoto's who constantly wants to do him a favor. The beauty began to scream, shouting that it would have been better if they had been crushed by this boulder than to be left behind and lose so stupidly, because this would have been a defeat in its purest form. The young man sitting next to her asked his friend why she suddenly started talking to herself, if there was someone nearby with whom she could share her thoughts. Looking somewhere, the guy asked what the girl would be willing to do if he did one thing. Closing her eyes, Suzuka said that she was ready to do anything, if only they could achieve victory. The beauty did not believe that the young man really wanted to help her. But she suddenly came to her senses and asked what the young man was planning, since they were trapped and the stones couldn't be moved just like that. Moving as close as possible to his acquaintance, Yuenjun explained that they had practically no time and needed to act very quickly. After that, grabbing the steering wheel, the guy shouted that now was the time to go on an adventure. And just a moment later, picking up a little speed, our hero headed in the direction where the huge boulder was located. The girl didn't understand what was happening. The road was blocked. Despite this, the young man picked up speed with every second. A moment later, Suzuka clearly felt that they had broken away from the surface, although it seemed like sheer madness. At the same time, an enemy car was racing along the road, unimpeded by anything. Fujiwara laughed and said that Suzuka was very unlucky, and heard the brunette add that now they could relax and ride calmly because victory was already assured. However, at that very moment, the young people were confused by some strange sound, which only grew louder. Looking around, no one was visible, and considering that the road was blocked, there couldn't be anyone in these parts. But then something happened that no one expected, because suddenly our hero's car landed in front of the enemy's car. The dumbfounded ill-wishers could never have imagined that something like this would happen. The finish was already very close, and the spectators, who were peering into the distance, declared that the winner was already visible. Yuan Jun was confident. He knew that they could take their time because their opponents would not be able to overtake them. Therefore, the car was driving at a normal speed, but with absolute confidence. At that moment, the spectators started talking about how Fujiwara really did a great job, arriving so quickly, and besides, the souped-up Koenigsegg was much cooler than a regular Porsche. Yamamoto was overjoyed. He was already thinking how he would now look arrogantly at his rivals, showing that he was once again better than everyone else. But suddenly the headlights dimmed a little, and those gathered could see the color of the car, which was not at all what they expected. People started saying that this simply couldn't be happening, that they didn't know what had happened, but that was just nonsense. Porsche drove confidently towards the finish line, which was only a few meters away. A moment later, the victory line was crossed, which meant only one thing: the girl had managed to do what she had planned. Some of the boys wanted Suzuka to win, so they rushed to meet her to express their admiration. As for our hero, he carried his friend out of the car in his arms and declared that he had said earlier that he could handle it, and he kept his word. But instead of gratitude, the beauty looked very suspiciously at the man who brought her victory. And at that very second, she hit him on the cheek with her fist as hard as she could, asking what she was doing in his arms. Yamamoto, at the same time not paying attention to those gathered around, scolded Fujiwara and his friend, saying that they were nothing special at all since some Chinese guy had overtaken them. The blonde tried to say something in his defense, but the young man didn't want to hear anything, shouting that this boy probably just got off a horse-drawn carriage, that he probably saw a sports car for the first time, but he still won. The ill-wisher wanted to say something else, but suddenly felt someone's hand on his shoulder. It was our hero who noted that now was the time to discuss the reward due. The bespectacled man replied in a frightened voice that he had not actually argued with the girl about anything, and pointing to the brunette, he declared that it was this silly girl who had made the bet, and therefore she was the one to answer for it. The girl was struck by this senseless statement, and so she tried to say something in her own defense. However, the young man walked away and said as he walked, it was necessary to accept what was deserved. Moreover, the brunette should leave him alone. It seemed that the girl did not hear these words. Grabbing the bespectacled man by the hand, she asked him to give her another chance. But for the man, no one existed except himself, and so he slapped his friend. And then he continued to say that if it weren't for Kuki, he wouldn't have found himself in such a stupid situation, and added that if he saw her again, it would be bad. Standing in the middle of the road, the girl thought that this was the real end. The reason was that she lost again, even though she tried to do everything in her power. Looking at Suzuka, I decided that she had always been a head taller. The girl remembered how, when she came to school, everyone envied her. Everyone thought that she was rich, from a good family, although this did not bother her. Moreover, it did not matter at all who said what. But who would have thought then that everything would end because of just one person? Suzuka Gubin appeared in high school and was greeted with joy by all her classmates from the very first minute. And only to Kuki did she seem like the most ordinary girl, with a stupid smile on her face. Despite this, there was something special about her, something that touched many. During one of the breaks, the girl herself greeted the brunette and explained that she had to transfer from another school. The new girl smiled sincerely, but there was no hostility between the classmates at that moment. Kuki thought to herself that being friends with this girl was so stupid, but she didn't dare say it to her face. Therefore, she pretended that everything was absolutely fine, and she was glad that there was another interesting girl in their class. As the school year was drawing to a close, the teacher gathered everyone in the class to announce the results of the preliminary exams. The teacher announced that she had received the maximum score on the test results, but then fell silent for a moment. Classmates whispered among themselves that it would be Kuki again, since there were no other contenders for first place. But suddenly the teacher continued to say that the best was Suzuka Gubin. The guys immediately started saying that the girl was incredibly cool and not only looked beautiful, but was also an excellent student. The brunette reflected on how she had now been pushed down to second place, although her results were still top-notch. As for our hero's friend, she showed not only good results in her core subjects, but was also the best in sports. The physical education teacher kept saying that Suzuka had the best time in the race again. Her classmates took this calmly, Moreover, many of them were sincerely happy for their friend's results. One day, Cookie's father asked her what had happened with her studies, and the girl honestly admitted that she had relaxed a little. But the father was angry. He shouted that he didn't need these empty excuses that didn't mean anything. In a drooping voice, the beauty replied that she understood this herself, but to herself, she thought that her world had turned upside down, and nothing could be the same as before. The girls at school noted that their friend hadn't hung out with them for a long time. Instead, she was increasingly hanging out with boys. The friends wanted to know what was new in the brunette's life, but she didn't really answer anything. Instead, she quickly ran away without even hearing how her friends asked her to at least meet up after school and go for a walk somewhere. In her mind, Cookie kept thinking about some voice that frightened her, from which she wanted to run away. The girlfriends didn't understand what was happening to their classmate. They wanted to cheer her up somehow, but nothing worked. The brunette was thinking about something to herself, but didn't think it was necessary to tell anyone about it. It seemed that the girl herself did not know where she was running. She just did it intuitively. After some time, the unfortunate woman heard a strange conversation. A young man was offering Shizuke to go out with him. However, the frightened girl said that he was Cookie's boyfriend, and therefore did not understand why he was talking about such things. Sato shouted that he would immediately break off all relations with the girl if only his classmate reciprocated his feelings. Our hero's friend didn't know how best to act in this situation, and so she simply remained silent. But suddenly the boys heard some noise and decided that someone was following them. At that very moment, the girl admitted that she was friends with Cookie and therefore could not act so meanly. The next day, another interesting story happened that literally shocked all the school children. Looking at the board where the photos were posted, the girls said they never imagined that Shizuka would behave so inappropriately outside of school. Although there were also those who noted that there was something false about this, since their classmate was constantly studying and did not have time for such things. At that very moment, the icy tone of the beauty was heard in the classroom, asking what they were saying about her. The assembled people did not think that the girl would hear what they were saying, and so they fell silent for a moment. Looking at the board with a searching gaze, Shizuka tried to understand who was trying to frame her by posting such compromising photos. The beauty said that she recently spent time with Cookie after school, and therefore her friend can confirm that she would never do anything like that. But instead of support, the brunette said she had no idea what she was talking about. And she immediately added that recently they hadn't even communicated at school, let alone anything more. Upon hearing this, her classmates immediately began whispering that the photos were probably real, and if so, they doubted Suzuki. Bowing her head, the brunette replied that she wanted to help but was simply not used to telling lies and did not want to mislead other people. Our hero's friend didn't understand what had happened to her friend, and so she kept asking her why she was behaving so meanly. Smiling sarcastically, Cookie said that she had no idea what they were talking about. Moreover, she had not even thought of setting up her school friend. After all, they are good friends, and therefore they are obliged not only to support each other, but also to tell the truth. Now, standing on the road, the unfortunate woman seemed to understand what she had done at that time. The girl said that this was probably some kind of karmic retribution, although it seemed very ironic. And after that, she started laughing, as if something very funny was happening around her. The girl was clearly not herself. She said that she had lost, and now she was waiting for someone to tell her what she should do. Suzuka was not like her former friend. She never wished harm on anyone. She never did anything nasty. For this reason, the beauty told Kuka in an icy tone to never show her face again. The brunette seemed not to understand what she had been told and immediately asked about it again. Suzuka shouted louder for the ill-wisher to leave if she saw our heroine anywhere, as she didn't want to cross paths with her in the future. Crying, the girl wanted to know why her former acquaintance was acting so mercifully towards the enemy. And she added that at school the beauty knew perfectly well who had set her up, but despite this, she simply left silently. And sitting down on the ground, she asked a rhetorical question about why everything turned out exactly this way. Our heroes, realizing that they had nothing more to do in this place, got into the car and drove away. The young man understood that they were not going to his friend's home, and so he asked where they were heading. Suzuka explained that he was good today, so she was going to take him to the best place in her city. The young man didn't know what they were talking about, but very soon the boys found themselves in some strange place. Our hero realized that they had arrived at a market, which was very busy at night, but the beauty added that this place was famous throughout Japan. Pointing to a store, the guy asked why he was using the girl's last name. Suzuka explained that this happens when people have similar last names, and therefore there is nothing strange about it. The young man became curious about what they were selling there, and he immediately headed towards the entrance, saying that he wanted to see what was there, although the beauty told him not to do so. However, Jun had no intention of stopping as he wanted to see what was inside. Entering the store, the young man saw people there who were actively discussing something among themselves. But the one who laughed loudest was the old man, who seemed to be the boss in this place. The surprised guy recognized his uncle, while his friend said with horror that there were a lot of shops in this market. Despite this, the guy needed to go here. Realizing that the old man had noticed the girl, she immediately turned away, hoping that everything would somehow work out. But it happened completely differently. Noticing the guest, the man immediately rushed to her, shouting that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. He missed her very much. Frightened, Suzuka didn't want to look stupid, and she thought about how best to act in this situation. Intuitively, the girl put her hand forward so that the seller could not hug or kiss her, which he clearly planned. Having bumped into the hand, the man immediately began to swear, not understanding what the guest was doing, and most importantly, what purpose she was pursuing in this. The man said that the child standing in front of her was terrible. They had not met for so long, but despite this, the beauty was behaving so badly, although Suzuka immediately stated that they had met last week. The guy couldn't understand anything. He was sure that his friend's father was a jeweler, but now it turned out that he had switched to another business. But the girl explained that this was not her father at all. He was the younger brother of her father, whose name was Jiro Gubin. The young man looked closely at the man who had already begun to greet him, and he in turn said that he knew the guy well, though in absentia, the brother said that he was their girl's future husband. After this, Jiro Gubin invited the guy to sit down and try the food he was preparing. Perhaps he would have to eat it for quite a long time if they became related. Realizing that the conversation had gone off track, the beauty shouted that this was all nonsense. She could explain everything, but no one was listening to her. When asked about her uncle, Suzuka explained that she couldn't handle one, let alone the other. While handing something to the guy, the man asked not to be judged harshly. Of course, his appearance may not be very good, but he always hides his soul. After this, the uncle again began to hint at something about a partnership, although the beauty again stated that she had already said that they were not a couple. But the owner of the establishment didn't listen to anyone or anything. Lifting a small towel, he said that now the guys would see his amazing food. Looking at this wonderful dish, the young man immediately remembered that he really wanted to eat something, even before the start of the race. Suzuka, who hadn't shown any sign of hunger before, was now also looking very carefully at her plate. Realizing that her uncle was shining a flashlight on the food, the beauty asked if they were really supposed to continue their dinner by the light of the flashlight. But laughing, Jiro Gubin said that he was just joking, and therefore the young people can start eating while the food is hot. The guy quietly remarked that the girl's uncle was funny, although she stated that if it weren't for his character, the city's jewelry industry would have long been united by him. Sitting at the table, the young people heard some strange movement and screams coming from the street. The old man explained that most likely the people from the Sasaki group have been preparing for elections lately, so the youth are not yet disciplined. The young man muttered under his breath that the name sounded very familiar to him, but out loud he declared that he would go and see what was really going on there. Despite his courage, Jun decided to take a look first in order to understand exactly how things were in reality. A blonde man grabbed the girl by the hand and said that she should be grateful to such a guest, although the brunette responded that she should be let go. The beauty, beginning to cry, added that she, of course, wanted to repay, but did not yet know how. The blonde man said with anger in his voice, "Every debtor says that, but in the end, no one returns the money." And then he grabbed the unfortunate woman even more tightly, after which he began to drag her somewhere. The next moment, the villain felt someone's hand on his shoulder, and a voice declared that this could not be done. It was not fair. The young man wanted to know who our hero was, that he dared to interfere with the work of the Sasaki group. Jun looked closely at the offender, wanting to show him that there was no joking around. It was time for retribution. Suddenly, the offender screamed something in horror, and the young man asked if they had recognized him. Suddenly, our hero himself recognized the bandit who wanted to beat him up in the bar, but ended up paying for it himself. Hearing that the blonde had decided to threaten his opponent, he asked if Taishima had really recovered from his wounds so quickly and had forgotten everything that had happened to him, that he was ready to take up his old ways again. Ju, approaching the assistant, rudely told him that the task was to bring the girl and not to look for new problems for himself. Having fallen to the ground, the villain began to explain that in front of them stood the very same young man who had recently wounded Taishima, and therefore they simply had to take revenge, showing this boy that he was the boss here. The leader didn't want to listen to his accomplice, who couldn't decide anything on his own, and so he hit him with all his might, telling him to go and rest. After this, he turned to Jun asking if he really wanted to take revenge on their good friend, whom he had mercilessly beaten. Zhu was sure that last time this young man was just lucky, but now the situation is completely different. That's why, after gaining speed, the villain shouted that no one could harm a member of the Sasaki group. The guy who stood there didn't seem to be planning on wasting much energy on this man. The young man took a stance to quickly intercept the blow and then decided to act according to the situation. The enemy didn't expect that some boy could intercept his hand so easily. The man admitted that this was no ordinary weakling if he had managed to harm Tashima. The young man replied that his opponent should be confident that very soon he himself would experience the same thing as his friend. The ill-wisher didn't believe it and said that Yuan Jun was confused because he would be the one to lose this time. It seemed that the young man had something in mind since he pushed his opponent away and took a few steps to the side. Our hero already realized that his opponent was a little stronger than those he had managed to deal with in the alley, but he realized that he could handle this one too. He just needed to find the right tactics. The blonde standing behind was glad that the boy retreated, believing that he was simply a weakling, and therefore shouted that now their great Jew would show what a fight was. At that moment, our hero answered honestly. He had no idea that the gang leader would be a martial arts master, which is actually a rare thing. Smiling, the villain said that if the young man understood this, then he should definitely know what the difference was between them. In an icy tone, Yuan Jun explained that there was not just a big difference between them, but a gulf between them. After which he began to activate energy to deal a crushing blow to the enemy. Watching in horror what was happening, Zhu, who had recently boasted of his strength, now realized that in front of him was a superhuman to whom he was no match. It seemed like this guy had an endless supply of internal energy that he could easily distribute to the task. But on the other hand, the man decided to convince himself that it was all a lie. Perhaps the boy just wanted to seem so powerful and invincible. Suddenly, our hero headed towards the enemy, who did not expect to see such incredible speed. The blonde was angry, although he knew that at that moment it was better to direct all the negativity towards his own defense. At some point, the gang leader decided to attack, not only to control his forces, but also to show his opponent that he was also capable of much. However, the plan failed. A moment later, the ill-wisher realized with horror that the boy had simply disappeared somewhere. Looking around, the frightened man wanted to understand where the enemy, who himself had shouted that he was above, had gone. The young man had planned to spend the evening in peace and quiet, but instead he had to fight, and therefore wanted to end it as quickly as possible. Joe only had time to notice how the young man landed and delivered a powerful blow with force. After this, the enemy froze in place. It was difficult to tell what state he was in. The assistant saw that something abnormal was happening. He carefully asked the leader how he was feeling. Not wanting to look weak, the man said that there was no need to worry about him. He was fine. But then he declared that he would have definitely died if Yuan Jun had not stopped his attack, which had incredible power in time. The young man replied that sooner or later, someone would appear who would decide to avenge Zhu, but he didn't need such problems. And besides, he wasn't interested in the blonde himself. And in an icy tone, he added that he simply didn't want to, although after that, he fell silent. The embarrassed brunette didn't know how to behave in this situation because she realized that this fight started precisely because of her. The man knew that it was now his turn to speak and immediately asked what the young man really wanted. After thinking for a bit, our hero explained that if their group, Sanasi, wanted revenge, then the guys should come for him and not drag others into it, although the enemy shouted that their group was called Sasaki, not Sanasi. And in a softer tone, he added that their boss had sent for this particular beauty. He was interested in her because of competition, and therefore the man would not give up so easily. Yuan Jun didn't stand on ceremony and said that if the boss dared to even touch this brunette, he would be killed. The blonde looked at the boy with fear because he knew how much power he possessed. And he promised that they would not involve others in beating the guy. This is retribution for his mercy. As for our hero, he replied that the villains should not pay anything since he had no mercy. The man didn't like the way the young man was talking to them in that tone, so he was going to show all his anger. The assistant did not understand what was happening to his boss, who had no clothes left on. Covering himself, Jiu shouted that he would definitely kill the boy the next time they met. As he left, the young man said that he would definitely remember these words. A few minutes later, the stranger asked what that had just been. The guy didn't answer the question. He simply asked a counter question about how it all started and also how the beauty got into such a story. The embarrassed brunette lowered her eyes, which were already filled with tears, but she was not going to say anything. Instead, the girl bowed and thanked her savior for everything he had done for her. Scratching his head, the young man noted that this was unnecessary. Besides, he had some problems with the Sasaki group. The astonished brunette timidly said that she still did not know the name of her savior, who immediately named it. Hearing that the name was not Chinese at all, the beauty asked if it was true that the young man was Chinese. The young man was not embarrassed by this and therefore confirmed that this was indeed the case. And again lowering her head, the brunette explained that she, too, was a native of that country. Considering that a lot of time had already passed, Suzuka was worried about her friend and therefore walked around the market and called him. Hearing the girl screaming at the whole market, the guy thought that all smart people use mobile phones these days, but that certainly didn't occur to the beauty. Realizing that he needed to appear familiar, the young man explained that a friend was looking for him. Smiling, the stranger explained that there was no need to worry about her. Everything would definitely be fine now. And while the young man was thinking that the brunette was very cute, he imagined how Suzuka would scream even louder, wondering where the young man had disappeared to when she found him. However, the guy didn't want to leave so quickly. He looked at his new acquaintance for a while. After this, he handed her a small piece of paper, saying that he wanted her to have it. And then he said that this was his contact information. If these bad people bothered her again, she should call immediately and tell him about it. As he ran away, the young man shouted that they might meet again and wished the beauty all the best. Holding the piece of paper in her hands, the brunette watched her new acquaintance. Lying in bed, our hero talked to someone in his sleep, explaining how to use his hand correctly. And then Yuan-jun started saying some really indecent things, repeating them over and over again. Standing behind the door, the girl thought that her friend was thinking about only one thing, like many guys of that age, which irritated her greatly. Holding the leg of the mistress of the house who entered the room, the young man continued to mumble in his sleep that someone might touch him, but he was a very sensitive person. The beauty believed that when the young man touched the leg of a real person, he would wake up and not continue to talk nonsense. And so, pulling her leg back, she screamed that this preoccupied man, just like before, was thinking about only one thing. Having placed her foot on the pillow, the beauty hoped that her acquaintance would wake up, but this did not happen. In order to somehow solve this problem, Suzuka decided to nudge the young man with her foot, hoping that this would help wake him up. The girl thought that the young man would come to his senses very soon, but this did not happen. The mistress of the house couldn't understand how this guy could dodge her blows so easily. Perhaps he needed to be even more intense. However, after a few minutes, the beauty realized that it was all useless, because the young man continued to do this as he slept. Finally, the young man opened his eyes and stretched, which really scared Suzuka, because she thought that her uninvited guest would sleep for some time. Looking at his acquaintance, our hero wanted to say something, since he did not understand why she was sitting next to his bed. However, he decided that he would first simply wish her a good morning, and then they would figure out what to do next. Finally, the landlady said that it was already 7 in the morning, so they needed to have something for breakfast. But considering that there was no food, the guy had to go to the market and buy everything he needed. The young man didn't like this idea, but he couldn't object, and so after a while he found himself at the local market. The beaten guy muttered something under his breath on the way, realizing that he could have slept a little longer. Suddenly, our hero's attention was drawn to something interesting, something he simply couldn't pass by. In the corner sat some men who were shouting about selling interesting items, each of which cost 200 yen. The man sitting next to him made his friend shout louder so that all the passers-by could hear that they were selling good things at a low price. However, he complained, noting that there was no one around anyway, and therefore what was the point of shouting at all? The men were confident that sales would be good, and if so, they would be able to go and eat because they were hungry. One of the brothers started crying, saying that he had imagined his life differently, but now he was sitting and selling some strange dishes. Yuan-jun loved all sorts of unusual things, and in just a moment he was standing in front of the trinkets. One of the sellers looked closely at the young man, as if he had seen him before. The surprised guy immediately asked if it was true that they knew him, although he didn't understand how that was possible. Having nudged his younger brother, the elder explained that he had arrived only 1 day ago. He couldn't know anyone in this city, and there was no point in listening to all these fabrications. He added that the guest should carefully examine all the items and not talk about the sellers, and immediately suggested that the buyer carefully examine the goods because they were all antiques. Looking at the things, the young man thought sadly that he had not expected anything extraordinary, but these were just ordinary trinkets. Taking hold of a bracelet, Yuan-jun couldn't understand how anyone could want to trade but forget that the items had stickers with wholesale prices. The young man was about to leave when he noticed something very interesting. It was an unusual hairpin that shouldn't have been on such a market. It was strange that it appeared here. The person who made it has a high level of skill, but the material is inferior in quality. Why would anyone spend a lot of time and effort on such low-quality material? And while the guy was thinking about this, one of the sellers suddenly grabbed his hand. He said that the buyer's eyesight was indeed good, but this item was a family heirloom. It was not intended for sale, but for a young man they could give the hairpin for 200,000 yen. Yu and Jun thought that this was all very strange, because earlier the brothers assured that they had the same price for everything. At that very moment, another stranger came up from behind and said that the shop owner would be selling the pin for 200,000. And grabbing him by the hand, he asked him to sell him this thing for 1 million, because it was not worth less. Looking at the boy, one of the brothers shouted that this boy had already ordered a hairpin from them. He was the first, and therefore they could not deceive him. Our hero understood the scheme that was taking place in this place, and calmly gave the stranger the hairpin he was holding in his hands. Hearing the passerby's refusal, Yu and Jun explained that he didn't have 200,000 with him, so the one who came after him should take it. The stranger didn't know how to get out of this situation. He even fell silent for a moment to come up with some kind of story. At that very moment, one of the sellers joined in, declaring that all their treasures were sold to the first buyer. He had already established a friendly relationship with the boy, which meant that he would not sell the relic to anyone else, even for 100 million. Our hero replied that he only had 2,000 yen. The brothers and the passerby looked intently ahead and remained silent, as if pondering what to do. One of the men began to cry, thinking that the young man would still raise the bet. However, he then abruptly snatched the money from the young man's hands and shouted that he would agree to that amount. The sellers were delighted that they had finally managed to sell at least something, which was already considered a small victory. Yu and Jun might have stood there for a while, but he suddenly heard someone asking for help. Looking ahead, the guy saw some girl asking someone to wait for her too. After this, the beauty jumped up from her place and ran somewhere, knocking down everything in her path. The trader saw what was happening, but it seemed they could do nothing to stop the stranger who was doing something incomprehensible. Suddenly, the red-haired beauty turned to the salesman who appeared right in front of her. The frightened girl asked to give her a little time so that she could catch her breath and come to her senses a little, as she was very tired. After this, the beauty asked why the shopkeeper sold her thing to someone else, since she had a prediction, but the man completely forgot about it. In a calm tone, the man explained that he had not been left a deposit, and besides, the buyer had been gone for too long, and he had decided not to wait for her, because who knew whether she would return or not. Hearing the customer swear, the salesman again tried to calm her down and began to explain that she should know how things worked in this society. For small business owners like him, it's important that the person comes with the money, because often everyone else just makes up excuses when they realize they definitely can't afford something. With resentment in her voice, the girl said that, "Who is interested in this dirty society created by adults?" Looking at our hero, a passerby asked if it was true that he had bought the hairpin. If so, she was ready to buy it for double the price. The young man thought to himself that he had been unlucky lately. Every girl he met was a young miss from a rich family, and they all had the same pose. A moment later, Yu and Jun said that he bought this thing for 200,000. Was the stranger willing to pay double the price? Upon hearing about such a sum, the passerby immediately opened her mouth in surprise. The brothers who sold the pin heard this conversation, but did not intend to interfere, but stood to the side and laughed loudly. The shopkeeper turned green with surprise. He couldn't believe that our hero had actually managed to buy this pin for 200,000. At the same time, the buyer screamed that the man initially wanted to sell it to her for 400,000 in order to earn even more. And having pulled out the money, they turned to the young man, noting that she had exactly 400,000, and therefore she wanted to resolve everything on the spot. The men who had received only 2,000 for the pin were now lamenting that someone was willing to pay 400 yen for it. The girl immediately continued to explain that even if the buyer asked what was unusual about this hairpin, she would not say that this thing was carved from Haitian jade, and the real price could be calculated at 1 million for the details of the dragon's head. Yuenjun was shocked because he didn't understand how the stranger could say this so easily, and in front of everyone. The young man replied that the girl was right about the scales on the dragon's head, but the material used was not jade. The surprised stranger could not believe that it was a fake. But our hero explained that it all really does look like jade. Although if you look closely, you can distinguish this thing from the real thing. The color transition on this hairpin is too obvious. Real Haitian jade is not like that at all. The surprised beauty said again, or rather repeated what her new acquaintance had said, that the original was not at all like that. The stranger stopped for a moment and looked closely at the guy. She asked if this thing was fake. Then why did the young man pay so much money for it? Realizing that he had been exposed, our hero did not know what he could come up with. The girl screamed and said that Yuenjun definitely couldn't have bought this thing for 200,000. If that was the case, then he wanted to deceive her. But thanks to his speed, the young man ran away so quickly that the customer was unable to even react to it. As he walked down the street, the boy thought that the girl still needed to study and study to reach his level. But the very next moment, the young man told himself that he needed to stop. And standing at the gate, he remembered that he had gone to the market to buy some food, but had not done so. Yuanjun knew there was no food in the house, but he wanted to buy it, and so he scolded himself for forgetting such an important detail. But before returning, the guest opened the door because he heard some strange steps outside the door. The very next moment, the young man quickly ran out into the yard, asking the stranger who she was. As she was leaving the house, the girl said that it wasn't that bad. She even liked such an amazing trick. Despite this, the guy still looks hostile, so she wonders how he plans to defend himself. Our hero had no intention of fighting with someone he didn't know at all, and said he didn't see her being ready to defend herself either. At that very moment, the girl screamed that she immediately recognized the charlatan whom she had seen at the market some time ago. The young man made a disgruntled face and made up on the fly that he had never been to the market, adding that he had most likely been mistaken for someone else. At this time, the owner of the house came out of the house and asked Jimei what she was doing at the door. Scratching her head, the guest admitted that it seemed she had caught the wrong person. At that very moment, Suzuka, looking at her friend, shouted that she had ordered him to go to the market and buy groceries that morning, but now she didn't see any food. Hearing about the market, Jimei also started yelling that she recognized this swindler, who is now trying to justify himself and explain that he has never been to that place. After some time, all three boys were already sitting in the living room, but no one dared to say anything. Seeing how her friend had sighed heavily before, the guest did the same, not knowing how to start the conversation. Our hero, who was always very sociable, was also silent at that moment, looking attentively at the girls. Unexpectedly, the hostess of the house put hot tea on the table, which served as breakfast that day. Realizing that the guys had already met, the girl decided to formally introduce them so that they would understand who was who. Pointing to an acquaintance, Suzuka explained that it was her childhood friend, whose name was Jimei, who immediately said that they were actually true friends. After this, the owner of the house explained that the guy was her bodyguard and servant. Seeing that the young man was extending his hand, the proud girl demonstratively turned away, showing with her whole appearance that she did not even want to see this man. And a moment later, she explained to her friend that this bodyguard was too unreliable, although Suzuka replied that this guy may actually look unreliable, but when it comes to work, he has no equal. The girl burst into tears and shouted that this was the first time her friend had trusted someone so much. Although I continued to think to myself that the young man was a deceiver and was simply playing the role that was beneficial to him. And jumping up from her seat, she declared that she did not admit this, since it was all a lie. The ambitious girl proposed a bet. If Yuanjun lost, then he should immediately leave this house. After some time, everyone gathered in the courtyard. The owner of the house could not understand such a strange choice. And so she asked Jimei if she really intended to fight the young man, having heard that this bad guy was behaving like he was at home, but she wouldn't admit it. Covering her face with her hand, Suzuka said that she didn't understand why her friend couldn't change. The same thing happened to her every time. And she remembered how, just recently, Jimei had yelled at the young man, saying that the loser would leave the girl alone, although our hero did not understand this. After which, she explained that she was a good friend of the family and needed to be sure that there was a person in the house who could truly protect the owner. Yuanjun responded in fear, thinking that the beauty was pursuing some completely different goal. The guy wanted to explain that he wasn't afraid of anything. He was just worried that he might accidentally hurt her, but Jimei stood her ground, declaring that she could easily deal with any coward. Smiling, the young man declared that in that case he accepted the challenge, since he knew exactly how this battle would end. Suzuka knew that the morning had just begun and immediately said that she would go to the bathroom first since the guys were still planning to fight. But as he ran away, the young man shouted that he wanted to take a shower first because there was a battle ahead. After a while, the guy, holding some kind of stick in his hands, said that it took him a little longer because he still had to look for the right weapon. The opponent didn't know what it was, but our hero explained that he decided to use a clothes hanger. The girl began to be indignant, but the young man calmly replied that it was his magical weapon and he had every right to it. Realizing that there was not a minute to lose, the friend shouted to the hostess of the house to start already, otherwise they would be waiting for too long. Raising her hand, the beauty declared that the participants in the battle must prepare. At that moment, there was complete silence as the young people looked at each other intently. After a moment, Suzuka noted that now was the time to begin this competition. Looking at her opponent, Jimei thought that this man was actually strong. She had underestimated him a little before. Despite this, the girl was not going to give up, knowing that no one would be able to defeat her with ordinary strength. Yuan-jun wanted to teach his opponent something, so he explained to her that by creating distance, she would only be distracted by it. But the beauty did not want to be lectured. She shouted that it was not the time to mock her. And the next minute she rushed at the young man, thinking that he certainly did not expect this. This was nothing new for the young man. He deftly dodged the blows, thinking about what would follow. However, Zhimei had no intention of stopping. She attacked her opponent again and again, wanting to show him that she was much stronger. Wen-jun suddenly stopped. He didn't think that anything could be new for him, but the last technique really surprised the guy. The beauty screamed, "This is the basic footwork in the art of Kanao, and therefore the young man must remember it." Realizing that these were just leg movements, the guy spoke out discontentedly, which again hurt his rival's pride. She wanted to prove that she was the best and immediately attacked the ill-wisher, not giving him the opportunity to rest. The guy realized that the stick had passed very close to him, and at that moment the beauty screamed again that it was not over yet. And while the girl was performing her tricks, Yuan-jun studied them carefully to understand how she did what she did. Suddenly, the young man said that in order to reduce unnecessary friction, Zhimei uses certain steps on the ground to glide. I wonder if this is the secret theory of their footwork. The girl was angry that her opponent recognized the technique, but not wanting to admit it, she said that knowing the technique was not enough. She needed to practice more. The young man laughed at these words, waving his weapon and making some movements with his legs. Zhimei saw that the young man easily repeated everything she had learned over the years. The dissatisfied beauty asked what kind of trick this was, how such a boy could master this technique so easily. But instead of answering, the guy once again began to imitate what he had done before. Zhimei said, "The young man is masterful in his use of manipulation. It is indeed the basic footwork of kendo, even if his form is so ugly. Can anyone really learn it by looking at it just once?" And she immediately added that technique is not only about moving your legs. Therefore, you don't need to think that if you have learned to move your legs, you are already a real pro in this matter. Surprised, Yuan-jun said he wanted to see the true power of this kendo. In a stern tone, the girl declared that the true power of kendo lies in killing. The young man replied that if his rival doesn't try, he's afraid that if she loses, she'll just brush it off. But that's so convenient. Zhimei was angry. She understood that this boy was manipulating her so easily, and she did not know how to deal with him. Grabbing the sword, the opponent said that if the guy thought so, she would let him see the full power of the technique. At some point, the girl stopped. It seemed that she was gathering her strength. The young man also did not plan to take any steps. He expected to defend himself and attack only when the need arose. The beauty suddenly started talking about something, but our hero didn't know this language. Yuan-jun thought that his opponent would never dare to attack him, but he still stood in his place. The girl understood that now she would use a secret technique and do everything possible so that the guy would not understand her. Time dragged on, but nothing happened. The young man even got bored. And again, the beauty thought to herself that she wanted to start with a strong attack. Once again, Zhimei spoke some words out loud, knowing that she was about to launch an attack. After this, the opponent began to quickly swing her sword, not allowing the rival to get closer. The young man was surprised. It seemed that he had never actually seen anything like this. Zhimei was not going to give up, looking intently into the eyes of our hero, but this time she preferred to remain silent. The young man jumped back, and at that moment fear and something else very incomprehensible could be seen in his eyes. Suddenly, the opponents looked at each other intently, each of them shouting that victory belonged to him. Yuan-jun swung his weapon to strike, although he did not want to do anything that could harm the girl. The surprised beauty now realized that in front of her stood not an ordinary and naive boy, but a true warrior, capable of much. The next moment, the hanger fell on Zhimei's head, but the young man did it carefully. He simply wanted to show his opponent that it was not worth fighting someone he didn't know. The beauty had to somehow get out of this situation, and so she theatrically fell to the ground. As for our hero, he immediately explained that an object like his could be pushed forward. It was surprising that the woman didn't know this. But it didn't matter. Zhimei continued to mutter under her breath that she hated this mean boy who had planned everything in advance. The guy explained that it was a useless bet from the start, and if a girl lost in something like that, she should just be ashamed. Seeing her friend lying on the ground, the owner of the house began to scold the young man, shouting at him to get out of her house immediately. Although the blow was not very strong, the young man flew in the other direction and even hit himself. However, Yuan-jun decided not to complain, especially since his friend had turned against him so much that she told him to never talk to her again after what he had dared to do. And then she immediately switched to her friend, asking if everything was okay with her, if she was hurt. With sadness in her voice, her friend apologized to Tsuzuka for letting her down. However, the hostess of the house did not want the unfortunate woman to blame herself, declaring that only that uninvited guest was to blame for everything. But Jemay thought to herself that it wasn't about the clothes hanger. If the guy had been weaker than her or just as strong, he would never have defeated her. But that's what happened. It turns out that our hero is much stronger, but he uses his power in a very strange way. And what's more, he's not one to boast about his power. Helping her friend get up, Suzuka continued to calm her down, saying that there was no need to pay attention to this boy. It was better to examine her wounds. Moving along the backside, the losing girl thought that her bet was in vain. Despite this, the beauty was confident that the time would come, and then she would definitely show Yu and Jun that she was no weaker than him. Sitting in his place, the guy said that the owner of this house had a very heavy hand. But he didn't have time to finish speaking, because at that moment someone called him and said something about insurance. Listening to the caller, our hero's eyes grew wider and wider with each passing minute. At this time, something strange was going on in one of the offices. This could be understood from the painted furniture. The man heard someone telling him that all the games were over and there would be no more deception. However, the man in the business suit, turning to Kurata, stated that he would have to come to terms with the new state of affairs. The unfortunate brunette, who had already been saved once by our hero, now cried, saying that she would return the money, although she would not be able to give the entire amount back at once. Suddenly, Kurata intervened in the conversation and ordered the blonde to immediately release the girl. He didn't understand what was happening and therefore began to ask appropriate questions. But instead, the villain clenched his fist and was about to strike, but it was unclear to whom it was addressed. At that very moment, the ill-wisher hit the brunette, who now no longer understood what was happening. The unfortunate woman tried to say something, but couldn't even move. The blonde watched this with horror. He didn't remember them ever hurting the girls. At least they were never spared. And so the blonde turned to Kurata and asked if the boss had really allowed him to do something like that. Throwing the girl over his shoulder, the villain explained that he was not touching her face, which meant nothing terrible was happening. After some time, Kurata turned to the man in the suit and stated that he had done everything as he asked. Hearing about this, the ill-wisher stated that in such a case, the guard would be better off returning to his post. At that moment, Ju approached the boss, realizing that he had something very important to tell him. The young man said that there was no need to do anything because they had agreed with that boy about everything. But the villain didn't say anything. He simply put his hand on his protege's shoulder. After that, he called Ju by name, although he still didn't say anything, as if waiting for the right moment. Then the man asked if this person really intended to order him to do something, or even hint at it in some way. Realizing that arguing with the boss was pointless, the young man explained that he hadn't even thought about it. And the boss at this time again started talking about the fact that if that boy was really that strong, he wanted him to come to his office in person because it would be so funny. After the boss left, Kurata asked his colleague if he thought the guy was just a small fry. The man understood that these people did not realize how strong Yu and Jun was. Just one glance from him was enough to understand that he was not to be trifled with. He wanted to explain it, but he realized that words were unnecessary in this case. He needed to see it with his own eyes. After a while, the blonde man was left alone in the office. Standing on one knee, the guard was looking attentively at some sheet of paper. Realizing that he needed a little distraction, the man went to a bar. It was there that he unfolded the piece of paper and saw that there was a telephone number written on it. Joe sighed heavily and knew he needed some kind of plan because a lot of people could get hurt. And so he said out loud that he hoped he was doing the right thing and doing it for the good of others. After some time, our hero stood near a tall building, telling himself that there was no way he could have made a mistake with the address. The young man knew no fear, so he immediately headed towards the entrance. The guard immediately noticed the boy, although he didn't think he would want to go inside, and so he simply watched. But a moment later, in a willful tone, he said that the boy was definitely lost since this was a closed area. But instead of an answer, there followed a powerful and clear blow, which was better than any words or explanations. The force of the impact was so powerful that the man flew in the opposite direction, breaking the glass. Another guard was just as smug, yelling at the guy who said he would teach him how to behave. But apart from loud words, there was nothing else. The man didn't even have time to react before he started flying in the same direction where his colleague was already. Yuenjun looked at these people carefully and decided that now was the time to move on. With a confident step, the young man headed toward the door, knowing that a very important mission awaited him, and besides, revenge would not be long in coming. Sitting in one of the offices, the men were busy with their own affairs. They did not even think about what awaited them. At that moment, the boss asked Kurata about a case they had in a neighboring city. The subordinate assured that there was no need to worry, since their people were already on their way there and would solve the problem. But the conversation was not over. Suddenly, a terrible roar was heard in the office, which could not be compared to anything. The boss only had time to notice that either a piece of wall or a piece of glass was flying towards him. Kurata immediately pounced on a piece of building material, which looked rather stupid. Suddenly, our hero stated that it seemed that the Sasaki group did indeed have considerable capital and quite a lot of power, but the difference between them could not be compensated by quantity. The boss explained that all a company really needs is courage to appear strong. And he added, "Does the boy really want to know what it means to fight with their entire huge corporation?" The young man said in an icy tone that he didn't want to hear such nonsense. There was always a price to pay for breaking a promise. It seemed that the man didn't really understand who was in front of him, and so he replied that today he would show who the guy dared to raise his hand against. Moreover, it is much better to repay debts on time to avoid problems later. Yuenjun wanted to know how much Haruko owed, since he wanted to pay. But the man did not believe that the young man had such an amount and said that he needed the entire amount immediately. Our hero replied that it seemed to be completely different from what they had talked about before. And again, in an arrogant tone, the leader of the Sasaki group declared that the boy could still change his mind. The next moment something happened that the guy really didn't expect, because the sound of falling stones was heard. After this, some stern man yelled at the top of his lungs for the boy to know his place and go there right now. It was no problem for the young man to deal with the ill-wisher, which is what he began to do. The man suddenly stopped and looked with some fear at his opponent, who clearly wasn't afraid of him. Moreover, Yuenjun explained that the killer's aura was very heavy, and therefore he had no problem noticing the presence of this villain as soon as he stepped into the building. Kurata, who wanted to help his accomplice, shouted that now was the moment when they should join forces. And while one was approaching from behind, the second was already attacking from the front, continuing to threaten the guy. The men angrily shouted that the guy would regret ever setting foot in that office, and that it would happen very soon. Suddenly, Kurata used some kind of technique, directing the force of the blow in the direction where our hero was. However, everything turned out completely differently than expected, since the energy one then hit the second guard with all his might. The man stood still for a moment, not realizing why his comrade had decided to attack him. The second ill-wisher, who was sure that the boy should have suffered, was also confused by what was happening. And a moment later it happened that Kurata came very close to his comrade. At this time, our hero said that this is a sliding step in kendo. As a Japanese warrior, the enemy must be familiar with this technique. But the opponents did not listen to their opponent because one guard continued to strike the other. A moment later, Kurata was already lying on the ground, trying to comprehend what had happened, since they hadn't even had time to do anything. The second opponent was also on the floor, and therefore there was no need to worry about these people. They were not able to fight again, even if they got up. Looking at the boss, Yuenjun sternly declared that it was now his turn. The company's manager only said that it seemed like Ju was telling the truth, and that the young man was truly amazing. The man had no intention of fighting the intruder. Instead, he felt for some device under the table and was about to press the button. The young man was prepared for something like this, and so he did not hesitate and immediately ran towards where the villain was sitting. Only a second passed, and our hero was already standing on the table, thinking about what to do next. To begin with, the young man decided to scare the ill-wisher and not give him the opportunity to call for help, and therefore, with just one movement, he destroyed the furniture. In the same icy tone, the guy said that he didn't like jokes. Therefore, there was no need to do anything like that. Hearing Yuenjun ask where his friend was, the man said that why did the boy think that someone would tell him about this? While spinning the energy flow, the guy said that he, of course, promised not to kill the leader of the Sasaki groups, but there are other ways of persuasion. Pointing his hand at the villain, it seemed that the young man was not going to joke, because he knew who he was dealing with. Suddenly, a voice was heard in the room, asking not to rush to conclusions and punishments. Kurata explained that the brunette was taken to the Moulin Hotel, which is nearby. The boss didn't like that someone was talking about such things, and so, getting up from his seat, he angrily addressed his subordinate. As he left, our hero extended his hand, realizing that he was not yet finished with the ill-wisher who had decided that he could get away with everything so easily. The energy was so strong that the man immediately forgot what he wanted to say or do. Realizing that his boss was unconscious, Kurata addressed the boy as an older brother, hoping that the boy would have mercy on him. Moving around the room, Yuenjun explained that nothing terrible had happened to the man. He had only fainted. And then he added that he wanted to know the exact location where Haruka was currently located. At this time, some man in a strange suit turned to the brunette and said that it was time for them to begin. The frightened girl knew that she had to save herself somehow, but she didn't understand how she could do it. The stranger was saying some nonsense about the year of light, which the beauty could not understand. Haruko stated that she knew she had to repay her debt today. After thinking for a moment, the man said that this was indeed the case. He was already tired of waiting. It was clear that the girl was trying in every possible way, not only to buy time, but also to make the ill-wisher delay the payment. It seemed that Haruka had succeeded in her plan because the man began to talk about the fact that the captive was in debt and the interest rate was higher than that of Sunben. If the beauty agrees to date the man, then the question of interest will be resolved. The embarrassed brunette quickly screamed that this would never happen, after which she began to back away. As she left, the unfortunate woman screamed that she needed to go and do her own thing. But the man grabbed the girl's hand with force, ordering her to stand still. The ill-wisher began blackmailing her, explaining that her brother's life was at stake, and it turned out that the sister was completely unaware of what would happen to him. The guy borrowed a large sum of money. If she doesn't pay for it, then the bespectacled guy guarantees that he will never see the dawn again. Confused, Haruko wanted to say something, but she didn't understand what words could improve the current state of affairs. Suddenly, the man felt someone quickly grab his hand, shouting that the brunette no longer owed anything to anyone. He added that his friend cannot live peacefully, although she should, but she is hindered by such old people who have no idea what is on their minds. The ill-wisher did not understand who this boy was, and therefore immediately began asking all sorts of questions. After thinking for a bit, the guy gave his name and then replied that he got here in a very interesting way. And pointing to the security guard lying in the hall, he continued to say that he entered through the door, like all normal people. The frightened, bespectacled man couldn't believe his eyes and therefore said that this was an elite bodyguard whom he had previously hired from the Sasaki group. There was no one who could defeat him. In an indifferent tone, Yuenjun explained that he would pay the girl's debt and therefore everyone should forget about her. Grabbing his suitcase, the ill-wisher declared that he had never thought that the girl could have such powerful friends. But if this was how things had turned out, then he should go already. As he left, the fat man pretended that nothing had happened. And what's more, he even waved to the boys as if they were friends. But our hero was more worried about the beauty, who said that everything was fine with her, but this was thanks to her faithful friend, who left all his affairs and came here. The girl still wanted to say something, but the next minute something else distracted her. Haruko shouted loudly for her comrade to be careful, as he was in danger. The bespectacled man, who had assured everyone that they had already decided everything, now held a pistol aimed at the guy and had even managed to fire it. For a moment it seemed as if time had stopped or everything was happening in slow motion. Our hero knew for sure that his main task was to protect the girl, and so he covered her with his body. And then the young man thought about how to make sure that this bullet would not harm him. And while Haruko continued to shout something, the young man had already begun to connect his internal energy, realizing what he wanted to do. But the next second, Yuenjun realized that his plan wouldn't work. He wanted to push the brunette away and run away, but he knew that he wasn't fast enough to do both of these things. It was necessary to choose one thing, but this was also not an option. Therefore, it was necessary to come up with something else on the fly. Having swirled the energy, the young man knew that his action might not be easy, but it was the only right decision. Putting his hand forward, Yuenjun told himself that he would simply take the blow. The next moment, the bullet was already in our hero's hand, but this piece of metal did not cause him any harm. The young man looked sternly at the offender, realizing that he had not fulfilled the terms of the agreement and had not left in peace. Swinging with all his might, our hero shouted that he wanted to return to the fat man what he had just sent him. The bespectacled man saw that the bullet had pierced the wall and even left a smoking trail there, but he did not understand how an ordinary person was capable of something like that. Realizing that this situation could not be left like this, the young man wanted to start threatening the offender. But he, as he walked away, shouted that he did not want anything bad. Moreover, he asked to be spared. After a while, the young man began to think about something, and it seemed that he did not immediately understand what he had done. But then looking at his hand, he admitted that he had not trained for a long time and therefore was no longer as strong as before. Seeing the red light, the girl immediately took her friend's hand to help him somehow. Yuenjun explained that there was no need to worry, as it was just a bruise that would quickly heal. Haruko asked her friend to be careful, because even a small wound, if not treated promptly, could become very dangerous. Smiling, the guy said that he didn't know this and never attached much importance to such trifle. Embarrassed, the girl said again that this was in fact true. However, these words somehow confused the young man, who immediately asked what had happened. The brunette did not answer the question. She simply asked the young man to go home as soon as possible. Not understanding what Haruko was talking about, the guy was already getting nervous. But the girl explained that she wanted to bandage her hand so that there would be no problems later. Yuan-jun breathed a sigh of relief and said that it was a very good idea that he would not refuse. Not understanding what was wrong, the girl asked why her friend had turned pale since he was full of energy, but he replied that he was just a little tired. After some time, Haruko had already wrapped up his hand and was now asking how the young man was feeling now. Seeing that this was a wonderful job, our hero thanked his friend, who explained that before coming to this country, she worked as a nurse. However, this news surprised Yuan-jun, who was sure that the woman sitting in front of him was Japanese, because her name was appropriate. The brunette, embarrassed, admitted that her real name is Li Shiking and that she uses her middle name to make life in Japan easier. The guy finally understood why he couldn't find the beauty on the list of debtors. He said that he went to the Sasaki group, although it took some time, but he still couldn't find the name of his friend on the list and therefore took the liberty of taking the entire list with him. And then I decided to check again to see if the girl's real name was on the list. The embarrassed beauty immediately began to mutter something under her breath. And then she screamed that in front of her sat a blockhead, the likes of which the world had never seen. The young man did not understand what he had done wrong again, because now everything should be fine. Closing her eyes, Haruko explained that it was dangerous to go into that company because there were only bandits there. But Yuan-jun didn't want his friend to worry because he knows how to calculate his strength, and besides, he knows what to expect. And he said no matter what they do, this group cannot harm him. He is very strong and can easily resist them. But tears were still visible in the beauty's eyes, although this time she did not say anything. Having handed a piece of paper to his acquaintance, the young man shouted that now she could be free. But this did not calm the brunette down at all, who began to cry even harder. The girl thought to herself that this wonderful man had risked his life to help her. And so she threw herself into his arms and screamed that she was very grateful to him for everything he had done. This might have continued for quite some time if the door to the room had not opened. Suddenly, the stranger timidly began to talk about the fact that he was already home. The boys hadn't done anything wrong, but despite this, they looked at the boy who had come with some surprise. Without saying hello, the stranger looked closely at our hero, declaring that he did not understand what someone had forgotten in his house. Yuan-jun thought that this was most likely Haruka's boyfriend, and therefore it was necessary to behave as politely as possible, which is why the young man gave his name, and added that everything that was happening here was a small misunderstanding. Grabbing the guest by the collar, the blonde shouted that he saw the guys hugging, therefore, there was no need to call it just a misunderstanding. Realizing that he had to turn the whole thing into a joke, the young man explained that they lived in a time when all friends hugged and that it was completely normal. But the guy just wouldn't calm down. On the contrary, he only made the situation more tense with each passing minute, explaining that friends don't just hug each other. Yuan-jun was much smarter, so he took a deep breath and stated with all seriousness in his voice that the young man had misunderstood him. In fact, our hero came from a distant country called Azabigigolo, and hugging is completely natural for them, although the girl's brother shouted that he didn't believe it. The brunette realized that she probably needed to explain herself and told Xiaohao that he had actually misinterpreted everything. But the brother was adamant. He said that it was clear from his appearance alone that this young man was not suitable for his little sister, therefore it was better not to deceive him. And then something even more unusual happened, because our hero pretended that he was a soft toy that did not feel anything. As he walked down the street, Yuan-jun told himself that he didn't expect his friend's boyfriend to show up so quickly. And he hoped that everything would be okay with Haruko, because he couldn't make excuses or explain anything to that guy anymore. Seeing that a message had arrived from Suzuka, the young man decided that, despite all their differences, she was probably also worried that he had been gone for a long time. Sitting in a chair, the offended girl said that they had not seen each other all day, and our hero did not say anything to her, as if he had nothing to say. The young man had no intention of telling the truth, so he made up on the fly that he was wandering somewhere, and then realized that he was lost and could not find his way back. The mistress of the house did not understand how the young man had returned, and he, pointing to the kitchen, explained that he had simply come for the smell of food. Having put some envelope on the table, the beauty thought to herself that her acquaintance was very strange, and she said out loud that this was a letter from Jime, which the guy should read, although he immediately became nervous. Having started reading, the young man wanted to say something because something struck him strongly. A joyful Yuan-jun shouted that this was the Japanese National Kendo Conference. Hearing that such a conference was held once a year in Tokyo, the guy thought that the girl wanted him to come there and cheer her up, but the hostess of the house declared that the person in front of her was a real fool. And she immediately added that her guest was holding in his hands an invitation to a National Kendo Conference. The serious hero seemed to begin to understand the meaning of these words. He couldn't believe that Jimei had actually invited him to such a serious event, considering that he didn't even live in Japan. Understanding her friend's emotions, Suzuka stated that her friend wanted the guy to lose in front of everyone at this conference. The young man was indignant, not understanding why he had to go there at all, but the hostess of the house replied that he was her bodyguard, and therefore it was necessary to do so. The young man didn't like such jokes, which he immediately said, adding that bodyguards don't attend such events. Hearing the beauty begin to say something about the master's desires, the guy explained that this role was performed by a slave, but not by a hired worker. Our hero didn't understand what was happening to his friend, but he knew that she was behaving strangely. Suddenly, Suzuka screamed that the young man had forgotten that he owed her 3 million yen, and that she was even giving him interest as a favor. A moment later, it dawned on the guests that a golden frog had been bought at the auction. While the beauty asked if Yuan-jun was pretending, he thought that she knew how to use his seconds of silence to her own advantage. Without waiting for an answer, the beauty asked in an icy tone if the young man had any objections. Realizing that arguing would only make things worse, the guy immediately said with a joke in his voice that he had no objections. As she walked down the street, the beauty said that the young man would then have to register the next day. However, the young man was not interested in this, but in whether it was true that Jimei had stopped at the museum pavilion. His friend explained that the girl's father, Itoji-sama, is a famous kendo master of the highest dan. This place is far from here, but many people come to study with her father. Our hero inquired whether it turned out that this great man was already a grandmaster. It seemed that the beauty had never heard such words, and the young man did not want to focus on this, deciding that he could go to the museum pavilion now. This place was really unique because it was full of people training with each other. The guy immediately said that he also liked it here because everyone was wearing special clothes, although he didn't understand where Jimei was. Standing in the corner of the room, the girl was training, and it seemed like she had been doing this for more than an hour. The students looked at the beauty in surprise, and she thought to herself that she needed to be even faster. Realizing that he needed to greet his acquaintance in some special way, the guy came up from behind and shouted something. A frightened Jimei asked with horror in her voice what the young man was doing in this place. Pointing to the girl, Yuan-jun explained that he only came here because the beauty's super friend brought him to this place. Suzuka said that they had been looking for the girl since the morning and thought that something had happened to her, but she replied that she had started training and had completely forgotten about everything. The beauties might have continued talking for a long time, but suddenly someone called out to the athlete. There was a stranger standing behind him who asked if Jimei wanted to tell him about his friends, since it was not for nothing that they had come. After starting to yell at Ajiro Takano, the colleague said that she didn't want this man to meddle in other people's business, since he had enough personal ones, and besides, she shouldn't call him by name. The friend wanted to know who these people were, but she explained with irritation in her voice that they themselves were ordinary hooligans who did not deserve attention. The young man didn't like the way they were talking to him. The guy replied that there was no need to be so angry. The beauty was trying to tarnish his reputation only because he was her fiancé. And while the guys were trying to understand how this was possible, the girl screamed at Ajiro Takano not to dare say such a thing, because she would never agree to something like that. Realizing she needed to explain herself, Jimei said that their parents had decided so, but the guy had completely forgotten about the bet. As soon as he lost to her at the national conference, the contract would be immediately canceled. However, the blonde stood his ground, saying that this was impossible because as a martial arts master, the beauty should understand that the gap between them could not be compensated for overnight. Shouting, the girl again explained that even if that was the case, she would never give up until she defeated her opponent. Ajiro Takano noted that after seeing the injury he received at the beginning, the girl had a feeling that she would be able to resist him, but this was a big mistake. The young man said that Jimei does not listen to her own body, and this is her big and main mistake. The guy knew the girl's self-confidence, but still asked if it was true that she was afraid of him. After these words, the beauty became even more angry, shouting that it was a lie. After some time, the opponents sat down opposite each other to begin the promised battle. Jimei thought that this guy was stronger than her. Therefore, it was necessary to start with a powerful attack in order to discourage the enemy. The beauty did not want to lose, especially since those people who doubted the beauty's abilities were looking at her, and therefore she had to show herself in the best possible way. The young man, pointing his sword forward, shouted that his opponent was still so slow. And while the girl was thinking about how best to proceed, she did not notice that her opponent approached her as quickly as possible. The athlete had no intention of giving in, and so he immediately struck the beauty with his training sword. Even though it was all a bit of a game, the girl flew back a long way. The frightened friend immediately shouted out her name, realizing that the unfortunate woman might urgently need help. Having fallen to the ground with a crash, the beauty remained silent, trying to come to her senses. Crying, Suzuka had already begun to wail, declaring that her friend had definitely lost in this round. It became clear to everyone that she was much weaker. Ejiro Takano's comrades were happy to say that their boss hadn't suffered a defeat yet. The last fool who challenged the guy to a duel had been lying in bed with a fracture for a whole month. Our hero also noted that this young man is actually strong. His speed and accuracy does not allow Zume to dodge or even try to do so. As for the athlete, he was pleased to hear flattering words. He said that he was currently using only half of his strength and therefore said that his opponent was obliged to kneel before him and admit her mistake. Not intending to give up, the opponent said that his blow was like a mosquito bite. Therefore, it was unclear what kind of force he was talking about. With anger in his voice, Ejiro Takano asked if the girl really wanted to die on the training field. And gaining speed, he shouted that he would make her understand what he was capable of. The speed of this man was so great that the spectators did not even understand what was happening at that moment. Although the boy froze a moment later, he realized that some force had stopped his training sword. Ejiro Takano saw a young man standing in front of him, although he didn't understand where he came from, because he definitely saw a girl in a protective suit in front of him. The athlete had never seen such strength. He wanted to know who this man was, but he thought to himself that it was difficult to understand how he could stop such a great master with just one hand. Our hero was reluctant to mention that his opponent might call him nameless, and moreover, they both knew the outcome of this battle, so it was best to lay down their arms right now. Suddenly, Jume spoke up and asked who said she had lost. In fact, the beauty was ready to continue this fight because she was already determined to win. The participants still wanted to say something, but the next minute she started coughing violently. After this, Jume sat down on the floor because she needed to at least slightly restore her own strength. Yuan Jun decided to say again what he had said earlier, that there was no point in continuing, it was time to end it. However, the opponent rudely stated that the boy was not in command in this place. Moreover, he did not understand how much longer the young man was going to hold his sword. Our hero thought for a while. He understood that this man was emitting very strong ki, which meant that he would soon move on to the next level. And then he decided that this was very good news, because in this case he would be able to fight without holding back. Yuanjun wanted to warm up a little and get a feel for how far his opponent could go. At some point, the guy looked closely at his opponent's sword, which he was still holding. The young man knew why he needed it, and therefore concentrated his energy around this weapon. A frightened Ejiro Takano couldn't understand what had happened, because he had coated his sword with his own energy. But despite this, the weapon continued to turn into splinters. A few minutes later, our hero was already sitting next to the victim, and his opponent was still standing rooted to the spot, trying to understand how it could happen that this boy was stronger than him. The ill-wisher repeated to himself again and again that this was simply impossible. And so he took a swing and declared again that he could not lose to some stranger who was nothing. Jame, who was sitting facing her opponent, shouted at our hero to be careful. The young man reacted quickly and therefore had time not only to turn around, but also to fully assess the situation. But just a moment later, something unusual happened, because a man stood between Yuan Jun and the enemy. It was a gray-haired man whose whole appearance hinted that all the fighting had ended there. The frightened Ejiro Takano could only nervously say what he saw in front of his sensei. As for the guy, he thought that this was the kendo master Hitoshi Ito. He is actually a very strong guy, from whom an incredible aura emanates. The old man said in a cold tone that a blow to the back was an act that was definitely not worthy of a martial arts master. The young man already understood this, and therefore tried to find at least some words in his defense. Realizing that it was better to show it with action now, the guy immediately fell to his knees before the great master. And then he admitted that he gave in to anger and did not want everything to end this way. Therefore, he asked Sensei to forgive him for this oversight. Hitoshi Ito looked at the guy carefully, but was in no hurry to say anything to him. Suddenly, the man declared that the one who had penetrated should not come here until the national competitions. It would be better to sit at home, completely devoting himself to thought. Suzuka didn't understand why this guy changed so much after seeing Sensei, and her friend explained that in this place, they pay special attention to the student's character, and for things like what happened today, they can even expel them. The only thing that helped was that Ejiro Takano immediately admitted his mistake and that he had excellent abilities. Otherwise, no one would have allowed him to practice anymore. Looking at our hero, the master immediately called him by name, which was very strange. The young man admitted that this was indeed true, but he did not understand how the great sensei knew about him. The old man smiled and said that his daughter had been repeating the same name since yesterday, so it wasn't hard to guess. He added that our hero is still so young, but the return of the swallow may break. Yuan Jun has a great future ahead. The master added that in martial arts there is no such thing as luck, after which he suggested that the guy talk inside. Suzuka pretended not to care, so the guy realized that he had no need to rush. A few minutes later, cups and tea were already in front of the men. The young man crossed his arms and respectfully noted that he had not yet thanked the great sensei for helping him before he had figured out what to do next. Hitoshi Ito honestly admitted that the young man was a real trickster, since even without his intervention, Ajiro Takano would not have been able to harm him. However, the guy understood that the master had called him here for a reason, and he immediately asked what the man wanted to discuss. Sensei was silent for a moment, after which he explained that there was no need to rush. First, he wanted to check something. And standing on our hero's back, he continued to say that he wanted to find out how great the strength of his new acquaintance was. Yuenjun only managed to note to himself that this master moved much faster than he did. And it wasn't just the movements, but also the fact that Hitoshi Ito had already begun his attack. The young man felt the man's hand touch his forehead, and again it was very fast. The young man had no intention of waiting, and so he immediately turned away. After this, our hero decided that now was the time to show what he was capable of, and immediately began to connect a powerful energy flow. Less than a minute had passed, and the opponents were already locked in combat. It was clear that each of them was doing everything in their power. The guy realized that the sensei was much stronger than all those with whom he had fought. Therefore, it was necessary to give it his all in order to win, or at least not fail in front of such a great man. At some point, the young man felt like he was about to fall because the master was very dexterous. Slowing down for a moment, Yuenjun noted to himself that this old man really hit hard. Looking at his hands, Hitoshi Ito said that this technique was so familiar to him, it was simply amazing. It seemed that this was an extremely rare occurrence, and therefore was something very surprising. At that very moment, the sensei asked if it was true that our hero was a relative of Yu Wenshan, although it seemed that the young man was very surprised to hear this name. The man explained that this technique God seals the finger. It cannot be easily used by anyone. The last time he saw it was 20 years ago. Finally, the guy shouted, "Is it true that the master knows his grandfather?" He explained that he knew him for many years. The old man often used this technique against him when they were still young. The young man said that this should have been said earlier, because he was scared half to death. Hitoshi Ito asked if he hadn't forced the boy, he would have used his power. Yuenjun admitted that looking at the old man's face, he thought he was going to ask him to do something tricky. It turned out that with the guy's level, this should have been a piece of cake. The man hoped that our hero would be able to take part in the national kendo competition and defeat his student, Ajiro Takano. Our hero found it strange to hear something like this, because every coach wants his student to be the best, which is a good indicator for a master. The old man explained that Takano had learned kendo from his father from a young age, and after that he had become his student. Although this path had been smooth sailing for him until now, and this had made the boy become arrogant and proud. The young man realized that the sensei wanted Yuenjun to publicly defeat his student, thereby showing him that he should not behave like that, but change his character. The young man explained that he considered this a brave and wise decision, but wasn't he afraid that after this the boy would give up kendo forever? The master explained that if this happens, then it is as it should be. Everyone chooses their own path. Therefore, he will not blame anyone for this. After thinking for a moment, Yuenjun noted that he understood the motives, but despite this, he had his own plan, a more interesting one. And then he added that he believed that Jimei, whom Ajiro Takano considered very weak and unworthy of this, should defeat this man. Upon hearing that our hero would be training the girl, she screamed as loud as she could, not believing that the sensei would allow something like this to happen. But the guy calmly said that her father understands that the young man is the only one who can help her defeat her main rival. The beauty screamed that she didn't want to listen to this, because the difference between martial arts masters couldn't be so easily overcome with small tricks. Even a sensei couldn't do anything like that. However, Yuenjun explained that it was not a matter of skill, as one might think, but of knowing how to use one's strength. After these words, the girl thought for a moment and fell silent. A martial artist consists of heart, body, and skill, but the girl's heart and skill are much weaker than her opponent's. The difference between the two is in the body. Jimei suddenly acknowledged this, noting that the young man's ki was much stronger, however, if she was given about 5 years to prepare. Closing his eyes, our hero said that she would study for 1 month, and he added that he wanted to say that he only needed this much for the girl to become many times stronger than Ajiro Takano. Suddenly, Tsuzuka shouted, asking the boys to stop for a minute. The girl admitted that she didn't understand anything at all from this conversation. Did some kind of chi really exist? The young man said that it was not such a secret. Ki was just a type of energy that was hidden inside people's bodies, It was only called that way for designation. But everyone is free to call it whatever they want. It could be magic or chakra energy. The beauty could not think that this was actually true and therefore asked if it was a joke. The young man wanted to know if his friend believed him, but it turned out that this was not entirely true. Therefore, he decided that in this case, it would be best to demonstrate what he could do so that no more questions remained. Raising his hand, Yuan-jun immediately began to concentrate energy around his hand. Watching everything that was happening in amazement, the beauty did not believe that this was actually real qi. The young man explained that when a person is in danger, he will expend more energy than usual. So in difficult situations, people find the strength to move heavy objects or do something incredible to save themselves. Finally, the meaning of her comrade's words reached Suzuka, and so she shouted that Ajiro Takano could easily defeat her friend. And again, the guy explained that this is not considered despicable. Everyone has this energy inside themselves. Martial arts masters can use it thanks to many years of training. The presence of QI is also a demonstration of one's strength. Sure, Takano may be despicable, but he is persistent in his kendo training. In response to Jime's question, the guy said that he could actually teach her in 1 month, although it would be very difficult. The beauty stood up abruptly from her seat, after which the young man tensed up, knowing the girl's nature. But to his great surprise, she bowed, declaring that from now on she was at his complete disposal. At this time, some man sitting in his office was swearing at the people standing opposite him. It was a fat man who stated that if it had not been for his quick reaction, he most likely would not have left that hotel alive. A representative of the Sasaki group addressed Mr. Shibata, noting that this time they had simply underestimated their enemy, but the problem would still be solved, so there was no need to worry about it. Looking at the young man with displeasure, the bespectacled man asked whether the leader's subordinates would be able to catch a bullet with their bare hands. The men remained silent because they understood that there was no point in saying anything. And the angry fat man continued to say that this boy caught the bullet with his bare hand, therefore he couldn't even be called a human being. Kurata whispered in the boss's ear that if this Shibata was right, then the enemy might be much stronger than they initially thought. The manager said the man had offered so much money that he could easily live on it for more than a year, but it seemed to be of little use. Realizing that this was not said without reason, the fat man asked what idea his colleague had. The man explained that the martial artist problem should be solved by martial arts. Since this guy was so strong, they would just send someone stronger to defeat him. Shibata replied that it was much easier said than done. Masters, these are not vegetables in the store. They are not so easy to find. But it turned out that normal gangsters could not find strong martial arts masters. They needed one of them to find their own kind. And then he turned to Takano, asking if this was right. Our hero's adversary explained that a strong master would not associate with some weaklings. Kurata shouted what his friend was talking about, realizing that this was an insult to his dignity. However, he didn't answer. He just silently watched his acquaintance. And then, connecting his internal energy, he asked if anyone in this room really wanted to fight him. After which, in an icy tone, he declared that what stood before him was the most ordinary trash. The guy explained that he knew several craftsmen who were willing to do such things and therefore could provide the managers with contract information, but he would ask them to hire them on his behalf. Shibata laughed, saying that all the problems associated with money meant nothing to him. At that very moment, the man said that Nakata would be able to contact the martial arts masters and that he would do everything in the best possible way. However, the man did not like this idea, which he told Mr. Yamaki directly. But he stood his ground, explaining that Takano would handle the phone numbers, he and Shibata would provide the money, and all that was left was to find someone who would sign the contracts. And he added that every person in this group must make their contribution. Nakata said that there is nothing good in this plan. Some will only have to open their mouths while others are actually the masterminds of the murder. However, Yamaki objected, stating that the reward for this would be very good, and besides, it would be possible to get rid of the annoying enemy, which was very important. The man didn't know what he could say in response to this, so he decided to remain silent and think things over. At this time, our hero was sitting in the garden, immersed in his own thoughts. His new student understood that something was wrong with the guy, and so she asked him what had happened. But the young man explained that nothing terrible had happened, everything was normal. After that, Yuan-jun started repeating something about the swallow's return, which made the girl fight harder than ever. Although she didn't understand whether this phrase would actually help her in improving her powers. Shisei thought she would train all day long, but that didn't happen. And while the beauty was wasting her energy, the guy was reading a magazine and pretending that he wasn't paying any attention to his student. The young man repeated again and again that this magazine was very good, and therefore there was no point in tearing himself away from it. But suddenly the young man saw the tip of a blade emerge from the paper, which was something very strange. Jumping up from his seat, the guy realized that the magazine had been cut into two parts and therefore wanted to know what was going on here. In order to avoid the blow, Yuenjun had to wriggle in a way he didn't want to, especially since there was no danger. The young man understood that it was all Jimei's fault, and so he screamed, wanting to know why she almost killed him. The disgruntled beauty stated that it was the young man who insisted on her education, and now the guy only spends his days looking at magazines. Our hero did not answer in his defense. Instead, he became interested in where Chizuka was, who had been here just recently. The girl replied that she didn't know, and immediately continued to point out that there was no need to change the subject of the conversation. Scratching his ear, the young man explained that he had already told her everything. He had placed a special seal in the student's body, and therefore now the chi would grow much faster. Jimei didn't quite understand this. She said that she had been training for a week already, but didn't feel anything, although she understood that this was too short a period for changes. As for Yuenjun, he added that the reason is also that the beauty does not believe in it. And putting his hand to her forehead, he shouted that he was temporarily removing the seal so that she could feel it, but he could not guarantee the consequences. The girl stood in place as usual. She began to talk about how she didn't feel anything. But the very next minute I realized that something unusual was starting to happen. Suddenly, Jimei screamed that she now understood that the energy was flowing in a powerful stream throughout her body. For the first time in a long time, the girl screamed with joy. She could not voice her emotions. They were so magnificent. Looking at her hand, the beauty said that she wanted to know if there was something wrong with it. The girl wanted it to end, so she screamed that she had understood everything and could move on. As for our hero, he even closed his eyes and turned away, because he understood that this flame was very powerful. The next moment it turned into some kind of thick and opaque smoke. The young man was silent and looked ahead in surprise. It seemed as if something had gone wrong. A moment later, the fog cleared and Jimei appeared before her teacher again. But her appearance was completely different from before. Yuenjun explained that he had sealed the kui inside the girl's body, causing it to stagnate. Now that the seal had been removed, this ki would naturally come out when the nervous system was no longer able to withstand the kui, and it would enter the flesh. This means that the fatter the beauty, the better for her. Realizing that the guy was openly mocking her, Jimei asked if her mentor really thought that now was the best time for this. Our hero explained that there was no need to worry. His friend would be back to normal in an hour, but all the effort she had put in would be in vain. Screaming at the top of her lungs, the girl couldn't understand why everything had turned out this way. As she swung, Jimei knew she had to give it her all, hoping that this knowledge wouldn't go to waste. However, the young man easily dodged it, showing that it was all quite boring. While training, the beauty said that she wanted not only to recover as quickly as possible, but also to learn everything she could, since the competition was just around the corner. The guy repeated again that as soon as the girl uses up all the excess ki, she will, of course, return to her usual state. At that very second, our hero heard someone calling him, and so he asked to stop the fight. But Jimei did not hear this, and therefore hit the young man with all her might. The force of the blow was so powerful that the young man was thrown to the opposite side of the room. The surprised beauty did not believe that she was capable of such a thing, and therefore asked for forgiveness for not being able to stop in time. Lying on the floor, the guy finally answered the call, saying his name. At that moment, Yuenjun heard someone say that some bad news had come out. The young man thought it was Uncle Tanimoto calling, and he wanted to ask him what had really happened. Suddenly, the guy shouted that Suzuki was in some kind of trouble, which was also heard by his friend standing nearby. While walking through the city, our hero's friend asked her father what had happened to him and why he had called so quickly and suddenly. The man stated that wouldn't a normal father have the desire to show concern for his own daughter? Besides this, he wanted to know how things were between the girl and Yuenjun. The angry girl screamed that she was sure that her father would talk about it, and therefore explained that this young man broke the agreement about their relationship, and now he is just her bodyguard. The man told the beauty not to worry too much about this, because the young man might ask them out after a while. But Suzuka no longer heard what her father said next, because some stranger in a mask ordered her to go with him. The frightened beauty wanted to know who this man was, and therefore inquired about it. Sitting in the room, Jimei wanted to know what had happened to her friend, why our hero looked so frightened. The young man said in a stern tone that daring to kidnap someone was something new, but it seemed like these people weren't joking. And just a moment later, the guy asked the girl to call her father, adding that he would try to intercept the bad people at the foot of the mountain. Jimei also wanted to go, but the young man explained that now was not the time for that. If these villains dared to kidnap Suzuka, then they had serious support, a connection with Hitoshi Ito, which would give them a chance to save the girl. With sadness in her voice, the student noted that the guy was saying everything correctly. And then she asked Yu and Jun to do everything possible to save their mutual friend. The young man was stern and angry as never before. He told the girl not to worry, as he would do everything in his power. After some time, our hero was running through the park, with a variety of thoughts, sometimes not the best ones, going through his head. Taking one step at a time, the guy hoped that his girlfriend would be okay and that he would arrive on time. At this time, Suzuka was lying unconscious on the sofa, while at the same time some man was reporting to the boss that he had delivered the girl safe and sound. Looking at the beauty, the man declared that it was an excellent job, done simply flawlessly. After this, Yamaki explained that now they would just wait for Yu and Jun to fall into their trap. And turning to someone, he added that they would definitely need the help of these people, but a little later. One of the guards stated that they had nothing to worry about at all, since there were a huge number of specialists in the house, hinting at martial arts masters. At that very moment, Kota said that he had one question. The boss had a good attitude toward this man, and therefore declared that the gentleman could ask him. At that very moment, the leader of the Sasaki groups felt that he could neither move nor say anything. After this, Hoda slowly asked if Yamaki really despised him. The frightened boss did not understand why this man decided to ask such strange questions, and Kurata did not understand either, asking him to stop these tricks. But the ill-wisher continued to say that the best martial arts masters had gathered around the man, and now he also had a hostage. And then he screamed, the reason being that Yamaki was sure from the very beginning that Hoda would lose in this fight. The boss understood that he urgently needed to come up with something to justify himself, but he didn't know what was best to say. At that very moment, another martial arts master stood up from his seat and noted that it was a good idea to be careful. Kodya didn't want to listen to anything or anyone, continuing to yell that he didn't want to unite with anyone gathered. Moreover, he didn't understand why he had come here at all if there were any unsure people. The colleague replied that if the young man lost, then he would definitely take care of him. Kota immediately connected his energy flow, saying that if anyone doubted him, then they could immediately feel all the strength and power. After this, a fight broke out in the hall. It seemed that both of these masters were strong, and therefore there was no point in them fighting each other. Suddenly, another guard ran into the room. He worriedly stated that this Yu and Jun was rushing towards them. Yamaki realized that the situation had truly gotten out of hand, explaining that no one was supposed to tell him that Shizuka was there. Kota, who didn't care who he fought, said that if the boy had already arrived, then he would come and meet him. Our hero, as usual, said nothing. He stood and looked attentively somewhere, or rather on people armed with sticks and swords, although it was all useless, because they didn't even know how to handle these weapons. A moment later, one of these ill-wishers attacked the young man, shouting that he was in real trouble now. But thanks to the same incredible speed, the young man hit his attacker in the stomach. Judging by the attacker's expression, the blow was much stronger than he expected. Yuan Jun saw the unfortunate man fall, and so he said that he had warned him earlier not to behave like that. And he immediately added that for a martial arts master, quantity doesn't matter at all. The people realized that they couldn't just leave it like that, and immediately started shouting that if they all attacked at the same time, then they would show this boy who was boss. No more than a minute had passed, and all those who had so diligently said that they would easily defeat the impudent fellow were now lying on the ground, lamenting that in front of them was not just a man. Our hero heard one of the wounded men want to say something, but ordered him to remain silent because something had made him very wary. Suddenly, the guy turned his head and heard the air whistling, which meant something not very good. The young man dodged as quickly as he could as he saw a sharp sword fly past him. At that moment, an unfamiliar voice declared that this was not enough, and therefore he would try to do the same thing again. Our hero understood that something was wrong, and so he jumped back to a safe distance to assess the situation. A moment later, the guy was looking ahead in horror, realizing that everything had not gone as he thought. After this, the young man admitted that he did not expect that such a martial arts master would be in this place. Kota laughed, saying that it was actually interesting. Realizing that this man had nothing to do with Sayamaguma, Yuan Jun was very surprised. The enemy laughed and said that now it was absolutely unimportant who each of them was. A battle between martial artists needs no reason, so there is no need to even think about it. The guy remained silent. He understood that it didn't really matter. The most important thing was to deal with the opponent in order to help his friend. Our hero had already met such people, and therefore understood that they were strong, and anything could be expected from them. And the enemy showed that this was true, because he immediately attacked the unarmed guy with a sword who was not ready for something like this. While fending off the attack, Yuan Jun thought that this guy had very strong arms. This detail was probably his advantage. After this, Kota asked if the enemy knew the name of his spear, and although it was unimportant for the hero, He assumed that he called it the death pistol. The enemy stated that the spear was called a dragonfly cut, and that even when it was not moving, a dragonfly landing on its blade would be instantly cut in half. This is how the weapon got its name, and therefore the guy will not be able to avoid a clever blow. The young man understood that it was dangerous, but at the same time he knew what he was capable of, and therefore did not panic. For a moment the opponent stopped, realizing that this fight was not easy. She caused Yuan-jun's sword to be damaged, and he was also wounded. The young man, looking at the cut, said that the weapon was actually not bad. Turning around, the master said, "The opponent only praises the weapon. Perhaps he thinks that only because of it there is an advantage." Although Yuan-jun immediately explained that the weapon is only a part of the master. After this, Kota laughed, noting that there are too many fools in this world who do not even understand this. And after a moment, he added that he wanted the boy to come closer so that they could fight to the death. The young man said out loud that he was facing a fanatic. Isn't this a comedy comic? How did such a narrow-minded character get into it? And again, pointing his weapon forward, the opponent shouted that now was not the time to be distracted by various conversations. The young man admitted that he wanted to continue this fight, but he had important business, so there was no point in wasting time. But the enemy didn't want to hear anything. Now he was saying that the boy wouldn't be able to escape from him so easily. The young man saw that the man was not really joking because he swung his stick again. Suddenly, Kota's eyes widened. He didn't understand where the enemy who had just recently been looking at him had gone. Taking advantage of the moment, the young man crouched down to deliver a crushing blow a little later. Our hero knew perfectly well what he was planning to do, and therefore spoke less and did more. The enemy laughed, saying that the boy's sword would never be able to reach him at such a distance, and therefore the attack was useless. Yuan-jun did not plan to reveal his secrets, noting that the result would be known later. At that very second, the guy struck to show his opponent that he didn't need to be so self-confident. The wounded Kota admitted that he did not expect such a feat from the boy. Holding his weapon in his hands, the young man explained in a calm tone that this was a very ordinary little trick, after which he said, "Now it's clear who won from the road," which sounded very strange. These words were not understood by the enemy either, who shouted that the young man was talking nonsense, and besides, he was wounded, and therefore could not be so self-confident. Hearing Yuan-jun say that his shirt was only torn, the opponent was completely confused. In a cold tone, the boy ordered his opponent to step aside, explaining that this battle no longer made any sense. While attacking, Kota explained on the move that the fight was the most important thing, and therefore they would continue the battle. The guy was actually angry that he was being held up so much, but he had to go through with it. At that very moment, something unpleasant happened. Somehow Kota wrapped chains around Yuan-jun's arm. The young man didn't understand what was happening, but his opponent was glad that he had managed to deceive the boy. The guy stood there for a while, wondering what the best thing to do in this situation would be. The young man did not move. Despite the fact that time was passing, he could not do anything. The opponent saw what was happening and therefore rejoiced, although he said nothing. But he understood that the chains were not his doing. A little more time passed and Kota swore. He didn't like the fact that he was no longer in control of the situation. With anger in his voice, the man shouted at his assistant that he did not understand who asked him to interfere in this fight. The stranger noted that he had no idea what Kimiyohoda was even thinking. Their mission was to kill this boy. This was a wonderful opportunity. But for the participant in the battle, this was not important. He declared that no one had the right to interfere in his affairs. A moment later, our hero's opponent was stunned, realizing that someone had struck him. Yuan-jun watched this closely, realizing that the situation was getting more and more tense by the minute. The opponent was wounded and could hardly stand still, although he remained silent, realizing everything that had happened. At that moment, someone's footsteps were heard. The stranger stated that the young man had been inactive for a long time and that the problem had not been solved. With anger in his voice, the master shouted at his colleague, noting that he was of no use. Hoda tried to say something to Hikari, because this was a real betrayal among his own people. But the villain didn't care. He laughed, noting that the master, who was incapable of anything, could not stop. Having jumped from his place, the ill-wisher jumped somewhere to the side. After that, he shouted that he would do everything possible to silence the annoying master. It was clear that Hikari was going to kill his colleague, but he had no idea that our hero would stop him by taking the blow himself. With anger in his voice, the ill-wisher said that he had never heard of anyone defending an enemy. It was actually very funny. Now Yuan-jun laughed, reminding him that there is a saying that says that the enemy of my enemy is my best friend. It seemed that the villain had never heard this before. Moreover, such a situation made him very angry. At that moment, Kota stood up, having carefully heard everything that was said about him. Hikari didn't understand what would happen next, but he was beginning to be frightened by the current situation. Realizing that everything would not go as easily as he thought, the villain stopped for a while. Standing behind our hero, Kota declared that they would now fight 2-on-2. However, the speaker suddenly fell to the ground, which the guy did not expect. Turning around, he began to ask how the young man was feeling, although he remained silent. In a sarcastic tone, Hikari said that he imagined it or that someone was trying to say something. There was silence for a while. No one dared to do or change anything. Suddenly, the villain turned to his comrade, but he explained that ninjas specialize in surprise attacks, so they are not very good in face-to-face battles. Therefore, the guy will have to deal with this on his own. Hikari laughed, saying that being a ninja was very comfortable and that anyone could dream of such a job. The colleague wasn't going to argue. He calmly said that while the foreman was saying something, his opponent was taking advantage of the moment and asked him to look up. Yuan-jun swung his sword, preparing to deliver a crushing blow to his opponent. The next moment, the guy landed almost next to the villain, but he was lucky and was able to dodge in time. The ill-wisher understood that all the young man's attention would be directed at him, although he did not want this, and therefore suggested first attacking the ninja, from whom one could expect some kind of trick. In a cold tone, the young man stated that in that case, he had even more reason to first deal with Hikari and then think about how to proceed. Suddenly, Yuan-jun shouted that now they would see what the opponent was really capable of. It was clear that for the young man, all the games had ended long ago, and now he would fight with all his might to save his friend, who was surely waiting for him. The guy was angry. All his movements were lightning fast and merciless. Despite this, the opponent was also not going to give up, believing that he would still be able to win. In a willful tone, the villain said that this was not all he was capable of. The boy should be ready for this. And once again, the battle began, and it was difficult to understand who was the best in it or who would actually manage to win. The blows were so strong that stones flew from all directions. For a moment, the opponent stopped to catch his breath and see what was happening to his opponent. Hikari looked ahead carefully, but something about this situation was making him very uneasy. Realizing that the smoke had almost cleared, the villain did not realize where the boy had gone, because he had just been standing in front of him. Finding himself behind the ill-wisher, Yuan-jun asked if it was he who had been lost by accident. However, the young man was prepared for the fact that the enemy would not just stand and watch, and would therefore definitely try to do something. The opponent didn't like the fact that some boy was going to outsmart him, and so he decided to act even more harshly than before. It seemed like Hikari didn't pay any attention to where he hit. The most important thing was to do everything to incapacitate the guy. The next moment, the villain shouted that he did not understand how the young man had managed to dodge his blow so deftly. But the young man explained that there were more important problems, so he would not advise focusing on this. Suddenly, Yuan-jun swung his sword with all his might to deliver a crushing blow to the enemy. He was surprised. He didn't think that he would face an opponent of such a high level. The young man was as determined as possible, knowing that in just a little while he would successfully finish this battle. But suddenly the young man felt how thick chains were once again wrapping around his arm, preventing him from finishing what he had started. Our hero wanted to move as close as possible, but the chains pulled him back again and again. Watching this, Hikari smiled, noting that if the boys had gone just one more inch, everything would have worked out. But he was alone in this area and no one could help him. But the guy was one of those who don't say anything in advance. And that's what happened this time when he declared that everything was as it should be. The enemy saw that the young man had actually struck him, but he did not understand how this was possible, since he had calculated everything carefully. Despite the fact that the chain restricted our hero's basic movements, it did not hinder him at all. After looking closely at the sword, the villain realized that something was wrong with it. And then he frantically added that this was not an ordinary sword, but a great sword of ki. Our hero saw no point in saying anything more, since it was already clear that he was not an ordinary boy who got into a street fight. The ninja understood everything, and therefore called Hikari a fool, noting that the young man could use his chi to lengthen a short sword. Of course, he could do the same with a long weapon. However, thanks to his dim-witted colleague, he still managed to get to the boy, and that was exactly what was needed. And while the young man was thinking about what to do now, something unusual began to happen. Yuan-jun thought with horror that somehow the opponent's energy was absorbing his own strength. The ill-wisher stated that the opponent realized this too late, and therefore in a few minutes he would not be able to do anything. The guy didn't panic, explaining that it was actually true. He couldn't even move a finger, but the same could be said about the ninja, who for some reason considered himself smarter. Holding his sword, our hero asked what the opponent was going to do in that case. He wouldn't just stand there and wait for something. At that very second, the young man lengthened his sword, which was pointed towards the ill-wisher. He understood that the situation was dangerous, but there was only one way out: to let go of the chain, Only then would it be possible to dodge. However, the man had no intention of doing this. He considered himself much smarter and stronger than his colleagues, so he thought the boy was just bluffing. At the moment when Yuan-jun's sword struck the man, he still continued to think that he was powerful and had been able to deal with even less difficult situations. The young man said that he had a reason not to lose in this case. It was because of the girl who was kidnapped. And striking harder, he shouted with all his might that he could not allow Suzuki to get hurt. The opponent, flying off in the other direction, was amazed. He did not understand where this boy got so much ki from, because it was something impossible. No one could stand it for so long. But no one said the battle was easy, because after that, the guy sat on the ground for several minutes, trying to rest a little and come to his senses. Looking at his opponent, our hero heard him tell him that the guy still had a chance to leave here. He then added that there were 2 more martial arts masters in the room. They were very strong. It turned out that Yuan-jun would not have a chance if he broke into the building now. Hearing the young man say that he would not wait for anything or anyone because he had important things to do, the opponent noted that perhaps this girl was actually very important to the guy. The young man didn't plan to tell strangers much, and so he simply replied that he was her bodyguard. The opponent did not argue, realizing that it did not matter anyway. At this time, Tezuka, who had already come to her senses, was now trying to understand who the people were who tied her up. The girl said that they would greatly regret it, since they did not know that her bodyguard was very strong. Yamaki was angry, so he told the beauty to behave quietly. Otherwise, 1 rope would not be enough. Our hero's friend thought to herself that as soon as the guy arrived, they would understand that this whole idea had been created in vain. At that very moment, the master looked askance at the captive. Catching this look, the hostage screamed as loudly as she could. She did not understand what this narrow-eyed one, as she called him, was looking at so intently. The young man had no intention of answering, so he simply turned away. Despite this, I thought that Suzuka was actually very cute. She, in turn, continued to look attentively at the stranger. The beauty did not like this man. She was worried that she was overcome by some kind of unpleasant premonition, although she could not understand what it was all connected with. Suddenly, the boss started talking, saying he didn't like all this. So much time had passed, but there was still no news. Maybe something had happened. Turning to Mr. Mochizuki, the head of the company asked him to go and see what was happening downstairs, since it was strange that none of the foremen had come yet. However, the man stated that his main goal was to ensure Yamaki's safety, so he saw no point in leaving the room. And after a short pause, he added that he had hemophobia, although it was not entirely clear what one had to do with the other. Realizing that this master would be of no use, the man turned to Minamoto, hoping that at least he would be able to fulfill the request. Realizing that the young man was silent, the boss called him by name several times, not understanding what was wrong. Unexpectedly, the guy answered. He admitted that he also couldn't help in any way because he was an archer and not very good in close combat. The manager himself knew this, but continued to insist on his own, since there was no one else to ask. Throwing up his hands, the master added that he had just remembered that he had completely forgotten about his bow. The man was angry. He did not understand who had sent these people here, because they looked more like fools who knew and were ignorant of absolutely nothing. Turning to the guard Kirishima, the boss shouted for him to be ready for evacuation at any moment, but the bodyguard remained silent, despite the fact that the manager had already addressed him several times. Turning around, the employee wanted to say something, but could not utter a word. As he entered the room, Yuan-jun said that he shouldn't be in such a hurry to leave, because he had one debt that he must definitely repay, as it was a matter of honor. The assembled people were horrified, as if it wasn't a guy standing in front of them, but some kind of ghost, and so they immediately began to back away. Yamaki screamed louder than anyone else, asking at the same time how it was possible that the boy was still alive, and what's more, that he didn't have a single scratch on him. Our hero answered knowledgeably that perhaps the guys they decided to hire were too weak and simply couldn't handle the task. However, the man was only pleased by the fact that the young man could be exhausted because he managed to defeat 3 strong masters. Hearing Yuan-jun propose testing his strength, the opponent said that there was no need to be so complacent since he had 2 more masters. It seemed like those in the room weren't even thinking about fighting this guy. Hikari realized this too, and so he shouted again that he had hostages. Therefore, the game was not over yet. Pointing the gun at Suzuka, the man declared that one move and he would no longer be able to guarantee the safety of this beauty. Looking at the girl, the young man asked how she was feeling. But the friend didn't answer this question. She asked a counter question about whether her bodyguard was injured. Rolling up his sleeves, our hero explained that he only had scratches on his body and there was no need to worry about that at all. Glad that Yuan-jun was okay, the girl asked him to just be as careful as possible. Smiling, the young man repeated once again that there was no need to worry because he knew what he was doing. Suddenly, an ill-wisher shouted, not liking the fact that the guys were talking to each other without paying any attention to him. The young people did not want to explain themselves to him, and so they simply sighed deeply. The young man finally spoke up, saying that kidnapping Suzuki would indeed make him more careful, but the villain had made a big mistake. Heading towards the ill-wisher, the guy declared that he should not be the one holding the beauty. Everything happened so quickly that the man only had time to say that he absolutely did not understand how this was possible. And a moment later, Yuan Jun was already saying that if the villain wanted to hold hostages, he had to be as strong as him. But the next moment, the young man noticed some movement that made him immediately wary. Mochizuki, who had been standing to the side, now attacked our hero with a sword, which looked very strange, because before that, he didn't care what was happening next to him. However, our hero was not only not upset by this, but was even pleased. He said that finally at least someone else would take part in this duel. The master simply explained that it was simply part of his job and that he could not allow anyone to harm his boss. Suddenly, the ill-wisher rushed at our hero, who was not prepared for such a strong attack. It was clear that the villain was going to go all the way, showing the guy everything he was capable of. Perhaps for the first time in a long time, Yuan Jun looked at this villain with some horror, because he was actually incredibly strong. Seeing that the attack was starting again, the young man crouched down, waiting to see what would happen next. Suddenly smiling, Mochizuki shouted at the guy to take the girl and get out of here because he didn't want to hurt anyone. The young man asked if the enemy wanted to kill him, but he explained that his mission was to ensure security and that nothing more was needed. In a stern tone, our hero declared that he had a completely different position. He did not want to just run away. This matter had to be brought to an end, otherwise it would never end. However, the master continued to convince the boy to change his decision, noting that even if he did not think about himself, he was obliged to at least think about Suzuki, who was next to him. The young man understood that he had to ask the girl what she wanted in this case, but the beauty screamed that the bodyguard was obliged to avenge her. Otherwise, all this was pointless. Clutching his sword, the enemy made it clear that his decision had been made and that he would not hold back. Suddenly, the man cut his hand on his own sword, which looked very strange and unusual. Yuan Jun wanted to understand what this meant, but all he could do was stand there with his mouth open. The same applies to other people in the room. Raising his hands up, Mochizuki shouted as loudly as he could that he saw blood, and it gives real strength and power. The girl saw that those who were closest to this man flew at great speed to the other end of the room, and only the guy managed to stand firm, although he said that this Kui was very strange. The guy continued to stand in place, thinking about how best to act in this situation. But he did not even suspect that his opponent was already standing behind him at this time. After this, the enemy struck. It was so powerful that almost the entire room was plunged into a cloud of dust. Our hero was familiar with these tricks, so he jumped to avoid the blow. Having run to a safe distance, the young man honestly said that it was close, but it was unclear what Mochizuki had done. It seemed as if the energy of a completely different person was now in effect. The opponent laughed. All he said was the word blood, although it was still unclear why it was so important to him. Moving towards our hero, the villain, as if enchanted, screamed something related to blood. Looking at his opponent, Yuan Jun thought to himself that this man had lost control of himself, but this was actually to the advantage of the guy who had already decided what he would do. No matter how strong he becomes, a martial artist who has lost control is still just a monster who looks ferocious. But this is only at first glance and is done in order to intimidate the opponent. Realizing that the enemy had managed to strike, the young man decided that all his arguments were correct, and if he had lost his head, everything would have gone completely wrong. A moment later, the guy turned away to catch his breath and figure out what to do next. Looking somewhere to the side, the guy declared that he had dealt with one, but that was not the end of it, because there were still others. The young man turned his head, realizing that he had to deal with the offender who had planned all of this. However, things were not so simple, as some strange pink cloud began to appear in the corner, which was very suspicious. Mochizuki, whom our hero had dealt with, not only rose from the floor, but was about to begin the battle again. A strange glow also emanated from the man's chest, although it was clear that it was some kind of Kui. Realizing that the beauty didn't exactly understand what had happened, the guy stated out loud that his rival had used all his consciousness to heal his own body. And while the young man was thinking about this, the ill-wisher again shouted something about blood and headed towards the young man. But Yuan Jun replied that with such thoughtless attacks, it didn't matter how many times the villain attacked, because everything would be exactly the same. The enemy didn't care. He ran towards where the boy was standing, hoping that this time he would still be able to win. As for the guy, he struck his opponent again, although it hardly had any effect on him. The villain laughed. It seemed that he did not understand what was happening at all. Our hero assumed that he did not feel anything at all. Yuan-jun struck again and again, knowing that his strength would not last forever, but at the same time an interesting plan was spinning in his head. Our hero decided to himself that this was all pointless. It was time to deal the fatal blow. The young man controlled the entire room, and therefore noticed that there was no one in the corner where people had been standing. Realizing that the criminals wanted to escape, our hero asked where they were going without his permission. But the men said that the boy was so busy now that he wouldn't even notice they were missing. Pointing his sword towards his ill-wishers, the young man told them to forget about their plan because it too would not come to fruition. The fugitives did not understand what was being discussed. They only realized that the exit was very close. They just needed to run to it. The leader realized that the boy would not let them go so easily. He saw a sharp blade flying towards them. But at that moment, Mochizuki covered the man with his body, not even thinking about the consequences for himself. Although it seemed like the sword didn't reach its target, as something similar to a ricochet occurred when an object changes its trajectory. Suzuka saw that something bad was about to happen, as if the blade was now pointing in her direction. Yuan-jun screamed as loudly as he could, wanting to help his friend escape. At that very moment, something even more incredible happened, which made everyone gathered open their mouths in surprise. Yamaki asked where the arrow in the room came from, since no one in the room even had a bow. At that very moment, another master who was sitting to the side spoke up and calmly explained that he had thrown this arrow. And he added that no one would calm down anyway, so he would have to intervene in this battle in any case. Suddenly, the events moved to a completely different place, to some battlefield. The unfamiliar girl gradually tried to rise from the floor, holding the bow tightly. The man standing on a hill shouted at the brunette to give up because she wouldn't be able to defeat him anyway. But the unfortunate woman did not understand how this could be possible, thinking that she also had enough strength. The ill-wisher looked closely at his rival, but decided to give her a little time to think. As for the beauty, she asked a question about how she could give up. As long as there was at least some chance, she would fight to the end. The girl was going to use everything she had to forge a completely new path. The villain stated that he was interested in whether his rival could do this, and if so, how exactly. As she launched the arrow, the brunette screamed for the Demon King to die. At this time, the master carefully watched what was happening on the screen. The young man was happy about it, saying that the spectacle was simply magnificent. Taking the small doll, the man was glad that it had done such a great and complex job. Suzuka, who was carefully watching everything that was happening, thought that this guy was in his own world all this time. He didn't care what was happening around him. And on the one hand, it looked very cute, but on the other hand, it was a little scary because it was very strange. Our hero's friend initially wanted to say something, but then decided it was unnecessary. At the same time, the master asked Nanatin, as the doll was called, to bless him with the power that she had. And if before this Suzuka had been completely calm about everything that was happening, now this state of affairs made her very angry. But the young man didn't care who said what, so he put his assistant on the table and ordered her to do something. The brunette immediately began to draw her bow, but no one knew who she was planning to aim at. As for the master, he repeated to himself again and again that Nanatang would definitely protect him from all adversity. At that moment, it dawned on our hero's friend that this wasn't just a doll, it was magical in some way, and therefore could actually shoot from its small bow. At that very moment, our hero, for some unknown reason, headed towards Mochizuki, who was standing not very far away. And in a moment, everyone realized that if the guy hadn't done this, then the enemy would have dealt him a crushing blow. The villain laughed. He was sure that he would definitely defeat the guy, although it was unclear what this evil master was counting on. At that moment, the little doll released a small arrow, which during its flight turned into an object of normal size. While fighting off an ill-wisher, Yuan-jun saw an arrow heading his way out of the corner of his eye, and so he immediately cursed, not understanding what the best course of action would be in this situation. The beauty who was standing nearby could not allow the guy to be injured, and therefore decided to cover him with her body. It seemed that with each passing second, the arrow was not only getting closer, but also larger. And so our hero shouted with all his might for Shizuka to immediately step aside, although she firmly said that she would not do so. The guy understood how this could all end, and again asked his friend to immediately duck or even step aside. A bright beam of light crossed the room, seeming to hit everyone in its path. At that moment, real chaos began. Because Yuan-jun was worried about his acquaintance, she wanted to protect her friend, Mochizuki wanted to deal with the guy, and only the young master did not show any emotion. At that very moment, the girl felt that something was wrong with her, and it seemed as if she was about to fall to the floor. The young man rushed to the beauty to understand what condition she was in, and to do at least something to provide all possible assistance. The guy saw his acquaintance fall into his arms, but he didn't fully understand what had happened to her. Realizing that anger was getting the better of him, the young man began to scream at the top of his lungs, asking why Tsuzuka had rushed to protect him, since that was his job. The girl said that the young man was always saving her, and now the beauty wanted to do at least something for him. The guy thought his friend was wounded, but at that moment, he didn't even think about going anywhere or doing anything. Suddenly, Minamoto approached the boys and asked what they were doing. The master smiled and said that his technique only works on those who have ki in their bodies. The stronger the kai, the more serious the injury. But this arrow is harmless to ordinary people. The surprised guy couldn't believe his ears, especially since for the last few minutes he himself hadn't understood the girl's state. As for the beauty, she was happy because she was a living person without any special skills. But a moment later, our hero felt ill, and now Tsuzuka was asking how he was feeling. The master explained that there was no need to worry. Yuan-jun didn't have much chi left in his body, so the injury wouldn't be serious. After vomiting, the guy would be as good as new. And then he added that, speaking of injuries, another master suffered the most. The man was actually lying on the floor. It was difficult to say how he felt. Our hero, who had already recovered somewhat, noted that this was a very powerful technique since he managed to knock down such a strong man with one movement. Minamoto suddenly said that the boy could do it if he ran right now. Realizing that the guy couldn't comprehend what was being discussed, he explained that those two ill-wishers had escaped, but had done so only a few minutes ago, and they could still be caught. The young man thanked the master for such observation, saying that he would definitely deal with them. But he still had one more question for the young man. And deciding not to delay, he asked why this unfamiliar man had decided to go over to their side. Hiding his hands behind his back, the master thought for a while, and it seemed that he himself did not know the answer. And then he stated that this is a complex issue, and therefore there could be many reasons. The next day, while running through the hospital, a man was shouting that he wanted to know what happened to Shizuka. The girl didn't want to explain everything. She just said that she slightly pulled her back, but that it could be ignored. The frightened visitor asked if it was true that the beauty had suffered because she had been kidnapped by gangsters. Hearing this, the boys looked at this man with horror. And then they remembered how the day before, Tsuzuka told her friend that catching those two was an impossible task. Therefore, there was no need to even try to do it. But a moment later, wanting to leave as usual effectively, the beauty felt a strong, burning sensation in her back. At that very moment, the young man began to worry again, and the girl only said that she felt pain. Suddenly, Minamoto suggested something, after which the boy immediately asked what it could be. The master only replied that the reason could be that the guy had used too much force earlier. A sudden shock, accompanied by a strong external force, could strain the back. At that moment, the patient did not understand much, and therefore now she screamed that the battle with the gangsters was very tough, and that is why her back could not withstand it. As he was about to leave, the man remembered that he had left the ring in the office. He added that since Shizuka was completely fine, it would be best for them to go back and pick up the decoration. The frightened hero jokingly said that he did not understand why it was necessary to rush things at all. Taking the young man by the hand, the uncle declared that, of course, there was no point in this. Realizing that the man was in a great hurry, Yuan-jun asked his acquaintance to slow down a little. As for the girl, she could not understand anything. Despite this, she looked after the men with some fear. As they walked down the hallway, the guy admitted that his uncle's office was in a good location, but he explained that it was all just for show. And stopping near the office, he announced that they had already arrived, although the guy immediately said that he would only enter after his uncle. Having opened the door, the man literally froze in place. He was so shocked that he could not say anything. Suddenly, he shouted out who the person was who was rummaging through his things. The stranger did not expect to see the owner, and therefore thought about how to get out of this difficult situation. Mr. Gobin asked with anger in his voice who the thief was, and moreover ordered him to move away from the safe immediately. Tossing the ring, the villain replied that he believed it would be much faster. Wen-jun also had no intention of delaying, and so he shouted at the stranger to immediately hand over the ring that did not belong to him. The opponent said that the young man's speed was certainly very good, but he wanted to be hit with full force if the young man dared to do so at all. The guy didn't understand why this man was acting so brazenly, as if he knew who our hero was. But there was no time to think, and so he immediately pounced on this thief. Clenching his fist, the ill-wisher declared that discoveries await him at every step. After this, Yuan-jun struck, not knowing what would happen next. The enemy's force was so powerful that the guy flew to the opposite side of the room, which was actually a big shock for him. Standing against the wall, the young man was in no hurry to respond with a blow. He understood that in this case, he would need to think everything through carefully. Folding his arms across his chest with a mocking voice, the thief declared that, of course, the boy could be beaten. But unfortunately, he had no time for a fight now, since he had completely different plans. And throwing something that looked like a grenade on the ground, he said that he wanted to say goodbye to the two men who had arrived at the wrong time. Our hero understood what was in front of him, but he realized that there was almost no time to make a decision. A moment later, a bright flash of light appeared, which brightly illuminated the entire office. Yuan-jun tried to cover himself with his hand, but at the same time he knew that he couldn't let the villain go. He needed to find out who this person was and why he had come here in the first place. Looking at the window, the guy began to ask where the ill-wisher could have gone, because he did not hear the door slam. The man quickly realized what was happening and, pointing to the window, showed that the thief was right there. Realizing that he was seeing something like this for the first time, the young man assumed that it was some kind of phantom thief who had thought everything through down to the smallest detail. Our hero thought he could use some tricks to catch up with the intruder, but he was too far away. Looking around, Yuan-jun tried to figure out what the best thing to do in this situation was. As for the villain, he was glad that his brilliant plan had worked, and therefore he would soon be completely safe. Holding on tighter to his flying machine, the ill-wisher heard something very strange happening behind him. Realizing that he was seeing a table, the man shouted that this was completely impossible, after which the object crashed into the villain, who was unable to maintain his balance and fell down. A few seconds later, not only the table, but also the broken homemade flying machine lay on the ground. The security guard, throwing up his hands, tried to understand what had happened in this place, but decided that the policeman who had already arrived at the scene would sort everything out. Mr. Gubei immediately ran up to the law enforcement officer and asked if he had managed to catch the thief. The man admitted that there were no results yet. They had only managed to find parts of an office desk and what remained of some kind of paraglider. However, the victim complained that he did not understand how someone who fell from such a height could even remain alive, let alone run or walk. The policeman explained that, judging by the traces left behind, this villain was saved by his accomplices. After this, the law enforcement officer asked if he could find out from the gentleman what was missing in order to begin an investigation as soon as possible. The victim explained that it was mainly about jewelry, but that it was small stuff. The most important thing was the ring. The policeman did not understand what ring was being discussed and was therefore very surprised. Intervening in the conversation, our hero explained that this was a unique ring of the Western Taoди dynasty. The men looked at the guy carefully, as if he had downloaded something very unusual. Approaching Mr. Magur, the young man gave his name and said that he knew this decoration very well, since he was its owner. Looking at the young man, the officer noted that it turned out that the guy was also a victim, and added that his last name was Mori, and asked him not to be confused with anyone else. Upon hearing this remark, our hero asked for forgiveness, but despite this, continued to call the man who stood in front of him Officer Magure. The policeman chuckled and said it didn't matter. He was already used to it, and then asked if Taoti's ring was expensive. The young man explained that its estimated value was several billion Japanese yen. Upon hearing about such a sum, the officer immediately began to smile, as if some part of it would belong to him. After this, he noted that this was no longer a regular burglary. Perhaps the men had managed to spot the thief. Yuan-jun explained that the man was wearing a mask, so they couldn't see his face, but he had martial arts experience and carried a flash grenade with him. The officer said this bad guy had access to military-grade weapons and was working in a group. Could it be those guys? After hearing the guy's question about who these people were, the police officer admitted that he couldn't say for sure. He was only guessing, although there was no evidence of this. Hugging Magur, the young man decided to say in a soft tone that he knew how to keep secrets, and therefore he would like to know who these people could be. He added that this was a very big case, and if the officer didn't solve it quickly, he would be under close scrutiny from the media and the public. If the man told everyone, they could use his uncle's connections to solve the case faster. The young man understood that he needed to persuade this officer, and so he also said that if our hero had the information now, and after a while everyone would start talking about it, then no one would even think that Magur had said anything. With a heavy sigh, the policeman replied that he would tell everything he knew, but the young man should not spread it around. It was very important for the case. After which he said that if his assumptions were correct, it must be the work of Mishikai. Hearing this name, the man literally turned pale. It seemed that he could think of anyone but these people. The guy thought they were some kind of gangsters, but our hero's friend explained that this was the largest underground organization in their city. They were well armed, and most of the group members were used to being mercenaries. Hearing Yuan-jun compare these bandits to the Saigumi, The policeman explained that they were actually two criminal organizations, but there were differences between them. The former may be brazen and bossy, but they are a government-recognized organization and generally follow established rules, while the latter are a terrorist group. The police have tried to raid their secret hideout several times, but to no avail. After these explanations, the guy realized that these were serious and dangerous guys. The officer continued to say that if it was really their doing, then it would be a difficult matter, and added that it was time for him to go to the office, but he would soon contact the men. Looking after the man, the young man said that it seemed Magor was wary of the Miyoshi-kai. The old man added that this was the most famous underground organization in the city, and therefore it certainly could not be resolved by police forces alone. Suddenly, the man called our hero by name and fell silent. After this, he bowed and apologized for such an incident, adding that he would do everything in his power to return this priceless decoration. Grabbing the unfortunate man by the shirt, the young man addressed him as an uncle, saying that no one thought that this would happen, so it was no one's fault, and as for the ring, they would return it. The guy wanted to say something else, but at that very moment his phone rang. Returning to the hospital, our hero heard his friend screaming into her ears that what had happened had happened. Suzuka stated that the ring was in the safe. She does not understand how it could have disappeared from there so easily. But the guy explained that he followed his uncle to the office. There was a man in a mask. Yuan Jun wanted to stop him, but the villain flew away. And then he added that fortunately he acted quickly and therefore threw an office table at him, but unfortunately the enemy still escaped. The beauty could not imagine this. She screamed again that the young man was making fun of her, although it was true. Entering the room, the man began to defend the young man, noting that the entire story was true. Realizing that it was useless to argue, the girl said that she would believe it. After this, Chizuka screamed even louder, saying that without this decoration, her friend would not be able to return home. With a hint of resignation in his voice, the young man declared that if he even dared to return home empty-handed, his grandfather would definitely kill him. The embarrassed beauty looked at her bodyguard strangely, although she remained silent. Yuan Jun realized that something was wrong and immediately asked why the girl was so embarrassed but so happy. Trying to hide her smile, the patient said that in fact she seemed very serious to him. Luckily, just a moment later, someone called Shizuka's name. Jimei and her great father came to visit the beauty. The girl was glad to see these people, but she didn't think that they would come straight to the hospital, considering that she was about to be discharged home. The friend explained that they followed the signs left by our hero, which led them to the Sayama Gumi Company office. However, when they finally managed to get there, it turned out that there was no one there, so they called our hero and found out what happened to Shizuka. Jimei was angry that she hadn't been told about everything from the very beginning, even though they were the best of friends and should share absolutely everything. Realizing that there was no point in sorting things out, the girl asked how badly the patient was hurt, since the damage to the office was very serious, to say the least. The beauty explained that there was nothing serious, she just pulled her back. Jimei wanted to know how this could happen, and so she immediately asked the appropriate question. The friend didn't want to go into details again and said that she was fine and would even be able to run in a couple of days. Realizing that at this time our hero was whispering something with the master, the girls wanted to know what was being hidden from them. The young man admitted that they asked Ito-sensei if he was familiar with the Miyoshi-kai group. It seemed like Suzuka had heard the name before, because she asked why they were being mentioned. The guy didn't want to hide anything from his friend and explained that, judging by some information, these were the people who stole the ring. After these words, the beauty began to worry even more. She shouted that these were very bad people. It was best to leave this matter to the police. The young man asked his friend not to worry, explaining that they had an excellent master with them, and with his help they could easily defeat these bandits. Jimei, who was the only one who didn't understand anything, suddenly started asking all sorts of questions. But Yuan Jun explained that it didn't matter, especially since she had more important things to do that couldn't wait. And then he added, wondering if his student had forgotten that the competition was in 3 weeks, and therefore from today on he would be responsible for her training. The beauty immediately looked at the displeased Shizuka, but was in no hurry to say anything. But then she still wondered what would happen to her friend if the young man were to train her. But it turned out that the patient was supposed to be discharged by the end of the day. The red-haired beauty was embarrassed by something, although she did not immediately admit what it was. But then she screamed loudly that in that case she wanted the young man to take care of her, since it was very important. The guy said loudly that he promised to be persistent for the next 3 weeks, and that it would be difficult for the student, but he didn't want her to complain about him. After some time, the guys were already training, and Jimei took it very seriously. To begin with, she wanted to make it so that the young man would not have time to dodge. Although she had not yet succeeded in doing this, After a while, the young people took a break, during which Yu and Jun picked up his favorite magazine. Noticing this, Shizuka not only yelled at her friend, but also hit him. Although a few minutes later, the friends were already sitting at a large table and eating with pleasure. And after that, the training began again, during which the young man said that the month of training had come to an end, and now the student must show Ejiro Takano who is who. A couple of days later, the boys stood in front of the pavilion where the competition was to take place. Worriedly, Shizuka said that the registration for the national kendo competition would be ending soon, but their friend was still not there. But the young man explained that this competition was important for the girl, and therefore she would definitely come, and immediately announced that the student was already there. Running up to the young people, the beauty apologized for being late, saying that it was an accident. Chikuka, as usual, was on edge and therefore angry at her friend, but she explained that she had been training practically until the morning. Now our hero also put in his word, declaring that the day before he had ordered Jimei to have a good rest and forget about training. But the beauty replied that for her, practice is the best rest. Moreover, for the sake of victory, she will not relax for a second. The young man liked this attitude of his student, which he immediately said. At that very moment, a voice was heard behind our heroes, noting that during the months of absence, the girl had become even more impudent and self-confident. It was the opponent who continued to say that since the girl was so energetic, she must have already recovered from her injury. Jimei replied that the guy shouldn't be the way he is. She would show him everything in the ring. But Ejiro Takano again began to say that it would be better if the beauty calmed down and simply became his woman. The man who was standing behind him told the athlete that he was rude. He then added that he always thought that a young man, as a martial arts master, should show respect to his opponent, even if the latter had no chance of winning. Smiling, the ill-wisher said that he remembered his father's words and remembered them very well. As he was leaving, the man turned to Jimei, explaining that they wanted to talk with friends for now, but that they would definitely see each other at the competition. The girl's friends didn't understand why this performance was even staged, and the beauty explained that this guy's name is Hiroshi Takano. He is a good expert in kendo, but his personality is the worst. He is a pure hypocrite to the depths of his soul. The guy said that they should disgrace them in competitions. That's the most important thing. That's all they need to think about. At this time, some people were already gathering in the arena, and the hall was gradually filling up. Yuenjun didn't think there would be so many people, but a friend pointed out that this was a national competition, and there should be a crowd. Suddenly, the girl screamed. She said that she saw Jimei ahead. Of course, something was happening on stage, but visibility wasn't the best. In addition, all participants were wearing suits and protective helmets, which made the situation even more difficult. In the first seconds, according to the rules, the opponents sat down and even bowed to each other. But suddenly, the referee shouted that the opponents could now begin their fight. After this, the guys immediately started fighting, although again, it was extremely difficult to understand where and who. At that very moment, spectators saw one participant hit the other on the protective helmet. And a couple of seconds later, the judge informed everyone present that Jimei had won this round. After some time, new pairs were created again, and again as before, all the actions were repeated. To the delight of our heroes, their friend also emerged victorious in this pair, allowing her to move on. Ejiro Takano, who was fighting with someone at the same time, was also happy because in the pairs in which he took part, he had been the best so far. In one of the pairs, the master shouted that his opponent had fainted and therefore asked for a stretcher to be brought immediately so that he could be carried out. Standing to the side, Takano looked closely at the beauty and smiled. As for the girl, the most conflicting feelings were visible on her face. It was difficult to say what she was thinking at that moment. Shizuka wanted to somehow cheer up her friend, and so she shouted again and again that Jimei was doing amazing things. But the girl didn't understand why Yuenjun was so serious, because everything was going well. The guy confirmed that this was indeed the case, but added that it would be difficult for his student to win this competition. Shizuka thought that the whole thing was about her friend's main rival, who had been in the group with her for a long time. But the young man explained that the issue was not that at all, but that the young man's opponent, after which he pointed to him. The girl looked attentively at the stage. It seemed that nothing unusual or scary was happening there. In addition, when the pair reassembled, the referee shouted that the opponents could begin the fight. The opponents immediately began a battle that was not much different from the others. After a few people, one of the competitors fell to the floor and was unable to get up for some time. After this, the referee shouted triumphantly that Nishino had won this round again. Shizuka looked at the scene in surprise. She asked her friend what had just happened, since she had not caught all the moments. The young man explained that this Nishino made 3 consecutive moves that hit his opponent's neck area, but he controlled his strength and exerted enough pressure to just disable the opponent. They were looking at a real expert. With sadness and fear in her voice, the girl asked if Jime would be able to understand what this man could do and defeat him. The young man admitted that it is difficult to say now, since everyone hides their true strength. They will only find out when their opponents meet on the field and show what they are really capable of. Despite this, our hero is absolutely sure that one of these three will win this competition. A few minutes later, the host announced that the National Kendo qualifying competition was coming to an end, with Ajiro Takano emerging victorious in the first quarterfinal bout. However, there is still a third quarterfinal fight in which Jime must participate. Seeing that Suzuka was very worried, the young man asked her not to do this, because their friend's rival might be a little taller than her, but he would still not be her equal. The host continued to say that the results of this battle would determine which of the participants would advance to the semifinals. Jime knew that she must not relax under any circumstances, and so she looked closely at her opponent. When the judge gave the go-ahead to begin the fight, the girl immediately rushed at her opponent as if her own life depended on it. The beauty did everything as her mentor told her, and was attentive and persistent. It seemed that this battle would end quite quickly because the skill was at the highest level. Although after a moment one of the guys began to attack his opponent, although it was difficult to say who exactly it was. One thing was clear, everyone wanted to win in order to move on. For a moment our heroes managed to catch a glimpse of Jime, who was completely focused on her opponent. It is interesting that he noted to himself with horror that he did not understand how a beauty could be so fast, because it was simply impossible. This speed means that at the most crucial moment, the master cannot dodge. Suzuka saw what her friend was doing and was glad that she was succeeding, although Yuan Jun was a little bored because he had actually foreseen how everything would unfold from the very beginning. Despite this, the battle continued, and therefore interest in this final act did not disappear at all. At this time, the referee announced that the second round was about to begin. The opponents, as before, did not wait for anything, but immediately rushed towards each other to knock the opponent out of the game. Many felt that this round was much more interesting than the last one, as the opponents fought even more fiercely. At some point, the young man thought of something and therefore slowed down. But he did this only in order to attack after a short pause, but much more skillfully. Suddenly, Suzuka jumped up from her seat. She shouted that she did not understand why her friend was only defending herself when she was planning to attack. The guy explained that her opponent, Yamamoto, also uses a sudden attack, and so it seems as if the girl is imagining her worst enemy instead of this person. At that very second, the young man told his friend to watch carefully what was happening, because her opponent was making some kind of special move. And indeed, the next minute the enemy's gun struck Jime with all its force. On the eve of the competition, the girl told her mentor that Takano's sudden attack was too fast. Even if she managed to use Suriashi, she would not be able to dodge in time, she would get hit and would not be able to fight further. After some thought, the teacher agreed that this was indeed a very complex topic. However, the beauty did not calm down. She again asked what Yuan Jun would do if he met such a person in battle. Laughing, the young man said that he would simply go and punch the ill-wisher in the face. The girl didn't care that it was a joke, and so she asked again what the young man would do if he was hit completely unexpectedly when he decided to hit her in the face. The guy replied in an indifferent tone that if things turned out that way, he would simply dodge. Grabbing the teacher by the collar, the dissatisfied Jime screamed that she was asking how she could avoid it. Hearing Yuan Jun say that there was a great way to evade, the girl, embarrassed, asked what the young man was trying to do. And he ordered the student to close her eyes and clear her mind, to use her heart to feel it. It is very important to feel the flow of qi in your body, to feel the changes in the surrounding world. The guy wondered again and again whether Jime had managed to feel the beating of the sword, the beating of the earth. Standing on the tatami, the beauty remembered the words of her mentor, who even made her hear the noise of objects. The most important thing was to move the body in the way the heart told it to. The surprised master, looking at his opponent, could not believe that she had somehow managed to dodge the blow, despite its high speed. At the same time, the beauty looked into the eyes of her opponent and knew that this was her chance. After this, the girl immediately began the attack, realizing that she had to do it quickly before her opponent realized what was happening. Suzuka, watching all this, shouted that it was a great hit, right in the face, while the judge said that Miss Minami was going through to the semifinals. Ajiro Takano also watched the competition, but he thought that this simply couldn't happen. However, the father ordered that his son should not be distracted by such trifles. The most important thing was to watch and observe his real opponent. And the host continued to say that another couple would come forward to compete in the quarterfinals and find out who would advance to the semifinals. As before, the fight was commentated, although not very actively. so that the viewers could make some observations themselves. Everyone saw that the quick attack of Nishino, one of the contenders for victory, in the opinion of our hero, was simply flawless. And only Yuan Jun sat silently. He wasn't even going to comment on this action. Meanwhile, the fight continued, and the judge said that it would be very interesting to see who would be able to win this fight. It was truly a sight to behold, but at some point one of the participants stopped. The surprised spectators did not understand why Inoue stopped, because he could have attacked his opponent perfectly. The entire room froze in anticipation. People wanted to understand what would happen next, because it seemed that none of the participants understood what to do next. And again, those gathered said that it certainly looked like the master of his craft was about to hit his opponent. And then something even more unusual happened. As the opponent suddenly began to fall to the floor, the spectators, including our heroes, watched this in amazement because such a fight was in fact a masterpiece. At that moment, the judge announced that the challenger, Nishino, had only 15 seconds to finish this brilliant fight. Our hero said with concern in his voice that this man would actually be very difficult to defeat. He senses and foresees absolutely everything. Suzuka wanted to know if their friend could do anything to give her a chance. The guy said with sadness in his voice that there is always a chance, but in this case, it is insignificant. And while the unfortunate man was being carried away on a stretcher, the referee said that they would now announce the next order. Terhara Nishino from Tokyo would face him in the semifinals. Listening to these words, our hero's acquaintance thought with horror that Jimei had fought with someone else, but not with this man. The beauty, lost in her thoughts, did not want to hear what she was saying, hoping that her friend would be able to fight her worst enemy. But time could not drag on forever, and so a moment later, Suzuka heard that this great master's opponent would be Jimei. With horror in her voice, the girl whispered under her breath that this simply couldn't be. It was so unfair. And jumping up from her seat, she shouted at the young man, wanting to know what they should do in such a case. But to her surprise, she noticed that there was no one nearby. As for Jimei, she was standing in the arena, warming up, when she heard someone calling her name. It was our hero who was waving to the girl because he wanted to tell her something. The participant did not understand what her mentor was doing, and he only asked if she was confident of her victory. The embarrassed student admitted that she had confidence, but it was weak. She thought her chances were around 30%. However, the young man said that now was the time to use something interesting. But upon hearing this, Jimei started screaming, explaining that this was her secret weapon to defeat Takano. Otherwise, she simply wouldn't be able to do it. But Yuenjin shouted even louder, saying that if the girl didn't win against Nishino, she would lose her chance for other fights, and then no weapons would be needed. The girl tried to explain something, but heard the host's voice, who said that the fight would begin soon, and therefore asked all the contenders to take their places. Smiling at his acquaintance, the young man added that even if she used the secret weapon now, she would be able to return to it later, and it was not a fact that Takano would find a way to dodge it. Suzuka, who was sitting on the stands, was talking to herself. She was angry because she didn't understand where our hero went. But suddenly, turning around, the girl noticed that the guy was sitting next to her again, and so she asked where he had gone. Yuenjun calmly replied that he had gone to increase their friend's chances by another 20%. And while the young man was shouting that his friend would soon understand everything, the referee announced that a magnificent blow from Nishino had given him victory in the first round. This was unpleasant news, and so the young man became quiet, realizing that it was too early to rejoice. Suzuka began shaking our hero again, asking what had happened. But the boy only replied that the student had not listened to him and that she continued to do what she thought was right. Holding the weapon in her hands, the girl heard the words of her opponent, who said that her heart was racing. It is unclear why she hesitates because she is a martial artist, and it is unforgivable for them to worry and hesitate at the moment of striking with the sword they are holding. Those masters who are weaker than Jimei deserve more respect because they know exactly what they are doing and where they want to end up. After which he added that he would tell her how to get rid of the hesitation in her heart. In the next round, he would use his real strength. If his opponent hesitated and was not careful, she could simply die. Suddenly, the judge shouted that the second round was about to begin and asked the participants to gather themselves and get ready. And then he shouted that now the guys could start the fight because the second round had begun. Jimei saw that her opponent was about to strike, but at that moment she closed her eyes and was lost in her own thoughts.